want me to buy some water, Trace? The rocket juice.
Okay, it's just turned 9:30, so let's get underway. If you could take seats, please. Thank you. Well, welcome to day 2 of this public inquiry. We've got a lot of issues to cover. But let me start with the usual housekeeping issues. We are, if you were here yesterday, you'll know we are being live streamed. There's a YouTube recording of the proceedings. That will be the case throughout all of the sessions. Usual instructions in respect of fire alarms. I'm not aware of any fire drill, so if the alarm does sound, please exit by the usual route. I was just handed a document from Mr. Vibart on Jersey shipyards. It's a short article, 2-page article, and I've asked for the programme officer to get that added to the document list. It arose, if you were here yesterday, you'll remember it arose with respect to the discussion about the siting of the cafe and the history of shipyards there. I haven't read it yet, but I will do, and I'll consider that. And if it goes on to the inquiry website, others can see it too. Okay. I want to take stock of, from the main parties, the sessions today. If you look at the programme, we've got 4 sessions today. The first is covering landscape and the natural environment. The second is covering quite a wide range of issues on housing, population, employment and health. And the final session is again quite wide-ranging on amenity effects. Just say my thoughts out aloud on session 4 with regard to landscape. We clearly discussed landscape quite a lot yesterday in terms of contributions from the applicants team explaining the landscape-led approach to the design. We also established the fact that, of course, landscape is a reserved matter and the detail will only come in the fullness of time and the reserved matters submissions. What I don't want to do is repeat all of that again. So I'm wondering whether we need to do, if you look at the detailed programme, whether we need to spend much time on landscape approach. But I want to just turn to the applicants team and just ask them whether they feel that there's anything on that matter that was not discussed yesterday.
I think it was largely covered by the session yesterday. As you say, I don't want to sort of reiterate the proof of evidence that was given.
I think we do need to do the second item because I've got a number of representations challenging the practicalities of the landscape approach. There are comments about depths of soil and tree planting because of the basements, and I think we also need to explore issues of management, maintenance, longer term. So I think we do need a short discussion on that. Natural environment and biodiversity. I've read the evidence and the submissions on that. If I go to the applicants team, have you got people appearing?
We have witness here from Nurture Ecology. It's my belief that we are generally aligned on these matters.
That was my understanding.
That will be brief if that follows through in the course of the day.
And on marine ecology?
I think we are generally aligned. We have no witness. We've made written submissions. We have written submissions back from the authority as well.
Okay. And I don't want that item to open up the issue around pollution risks, which we'll deal with on Thursday. That's a matter I think we'll pick up with regard to hydrogeology and
exactly.
contamination paths and all the rest of it on Thursday. So it feels to me that session 4 is going to be relatively concise. Let me just check my thoughts there with the planning authority. Would you concur with that view?
Yes, and just to note that in terms of marine ecology, we also don't have a witness here. Everything's summarised in our written submissions.
There is a consultation response, isn't
Yes, there is, but I think Francis Binney was down to appear, but actually he's not,
Okay.
not here. So, yeah, we concur with...
Okay. 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 Well, let's get through session 4 and see where we are with the timing. So let's go to the applicants team then. I mean, Mr. Conn, you might want to just recap briefly on what you said yesterday about the landscape approach, just to get us going, and then we can move into some of the challenges that have been made.
Yeah, certainly, very happy to. I'd like to sort of reiterate, I suppose, that the approach to landscape has been very much shaped by the expectations and the general principles that are set out by the South Western Helier Planning Framework. And that's particularly in terms of this kind of expectation to reconnect the town to the sea, provide safe and accessible pedestrian and cycle routes, the intention to create inviting streets, green spaces and public squares throughout the framework, and the need to support a vibrant mix of uses and allow those to kind of activate the public spaces throughout the scheme. And the proposals have evolved via extensive consultation, engagement and peer review into the scheme that's submitted for consideration today. In terms of how this is defined in the application, the scale and the proportion and the high-level definition of external spaces are set out within those parameter plans. The design codes set out the detailed design requirements to ensure that the delivery of landscape vision is something that's taken through in the RMA submissions. And then the accompanying DAS provides illustrative information to further explain the landscape approach and the evolution of the design. And landscape, we feel, is one of the core benefits of this scheme. Includes extended and enhanced green spaces, new civic squares and streets, new play spaces and outdoor leisure facilities, integrated green infrastructure and sustainable drainage, over 500 new trees and levels of urban greening that are in excess of the best practice benchmarks.
Okay. The planning authority want to make any comments on that?
No, that covered the ground from yesterday and is helpful.
You feel it was covered
Thank you.
yesterday? Okay. Let's deal with some of the challenges that have been made. There are a number of representations saying it, well, in a nutshell, saying, well, it all looks very pretty on a plan, but it's, is it practical in terms of you've got very extensive basement structures, limited soil depth, you've got a very exposed coastal environment. Is the pretty picture actually going to turn into reality? And if it does, is it possible to maintain that reality in the kind of glossy images that have been presented? I hope I paraphrase that in a way that's helpful to assist you with your response.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I think this is something that we've been really sort of keen to bring across in the codes. We've been very careful to make sure that there are a significant number of mandatory codes for landscape that are around ensuring that the proposed tree planting in particular and proposed planting has the right conditions to grow and will be the right species, the right kind of selection of groupings of plants as well. So I think that it's set out really, if I can refer you to the design codes, and I think it is, bear with me a second. If we go to section 4.10.2 of the summary design codes.
4.10.2,
Yeah, page 93. 93.
93.
Yeah. So this talks a bit about the tree strategy, and it sets a number of mandatory requirements in terms of the number of trees to be planted. And it sets out the requirement for trees to be appropriate for coastal conditions and appropriate to St Helier. And that tree planting needs to be reviewed against climate resilience, water demand, to ensure that it's relatively low maintenance and able to succeed. And what this does is it sets out a kind of groupings of trees into different categories as well. And there's further information in terms of species palettes. We need to provide some flexibility for those to be developed at detailed design stage, but there is the need for these to respond to environmental conditions. And then the DAS provides sort of further illustrative palettes, which have been developed with input from Government of Jersey Parks Department in terms of species and through review of existing trees, the existing townscape and what works and doesn't work. So within the DAS then you have these illustrative palettes, and they're very much shaped by the environmental conditions on site. So if we go to the DAS page 195, we have trees set out by their kind of level of exposure, I suppose, proximity to the sea. So the waterfront tree palette, referred to as the first line of defence, is made up of very hardy species that are able to cope with high levels of wind and saline conditions. So things like the home oaks that succeed on the waterfront, the pines. And those have all been reviewed by the Parks Department, and those they've commented on the illustrative palettes. In terms of ensuring the other kind of key factors, I suppose, in terms of trees succeeding are the space that they have to grow and reach maturity above ground and the soil volume below ground. So in terms of the placement of trees, those have shaped and been shaped by the block form to ensure that there is enough space for mature canopies above ground. And I think it's page 132 of the summary design codes sets out the requirements for tree planting sizes. So you have large, medium and small trees. There's not a sort of specific number of each that's required by the codes, but the accompanying diagram sets out clearly the kind of requirements in terms of where those different sizes of trees should be proposed. And they are planted at generally a fairly large size. So you've got, I think, 35 centimetre girth, 25 centimetre girth, and then some smaller trees in, I think those are generally in the kind of courtyard spaces that are down to 16 centimetre girth, but the street trees all at those larger sizes. And then in terms, the other factor that we mentioned is soil depth. So if we turn to page 134 of the codes, this sets out the requirements for soil depth. And although we have a basement under a significant part of the site, there are also large areas that are not on basement. So along the Rue de Libération in particular, the tree planting there would be in ground. Much of the new tree planting in the extension of Jardin de la Mer. Where we do have basement, we're very conscious of the challenges there, and we work a lot in very urban conditions where we need to is provided. So that's something that's been written into the codes. We're making sure that there is a 1.2 metre soil depth generally across the basement, which we have found in our experience to be sufficient for larger trees to reach maturity and to thrive. We have some limited areas where that's reduced to, I think it's 750, but that's generally in the greener courtyard spaces where you would have capacity to kind of mound up within the landscape, and that's explained within the codes. There's a limited area through the laneway which doesn't have significant build-up for tree planting. That's an area where no tree planting is proposed within that diagram. There is a suggestion that it could incorporate raised pots and smaller planters, more as a way of activating the street, but that's not something that's required for wind mitigation or any other reason within the codes. And then there's also, I think on page 135 of those summary codes, there's it goes into a bit more detail. Sorry, I was on the wrong version of the codes there, but it's page 97 of the summary codes. It gives some additional detail in terms of soil depth, the need to provide connected tree pits and other means to ensure that that trees are able to thrive in those conditions. The other point, sorry, that you raised was regarding maintenance. This is something that has been raised, by the JAC, and it's something that I think at the outline stage, where the planting is yet to be sort of defined in detail, it's very hard to write a kind of a thorough maintenance plan. It's not something that we would normally deliver at the outline stage. The design codes do include the requirement, I think, on page 95 of the summary codes for a landscape maintenance and management plan to be prepared for the RMA stage, and that's something that we would expect to see at that detailed design stage, and that I think we would be happy to accept as a condition.
Sorry, where was that you're referring to?
That's page 95. I think it's 4.10.2.14. The framework must have a landscape maintenance and management plan outlining tree inspections and care. And there's also some other references in the codes to, I think, within some of the building codes regarding ensuring that space for maintenance equipment is incorporated into buildings.
Okay. And how does that maintenance work long term? In terms of who's funding it? Is it residents paying service charges? Does the company take control?
I think Lee might be best placed to answer that, but my understanding is that JDC...
So, thank you. There will be certain areas that fall within the private demise of the new residential districts, and those areas of private landscape will be picked up via service charges. The public, large areas of public open space, for example, at Le Jardin de la Mer will continue to be funded by Jersey Development Company as takes place presently.
Okay. Thank you. Any comments from the Planning Authority on what you've heard there?
Yes, I think just going back to page 95, and in terms of the sufficiency of the tree cover, I have no experience to be able to say yay or nay as to whether 1.2 is acceptable or not. But I'm just interested in, have you proved that sufficiency in these particular conditions? Jersey, as you know, has the southwesterlies, salt-laden, and the challenge, I think, is certainly in Jardin de la Mer, which will be in soil, but other trees which will be in the wind and required for mitigation. Is that competent?
Yeah, I think it's something that, as I understand it, was discussed with the Parks Department in terms of the selection of species particularly, and I believe they were consulted on the soil depths as well. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of reflected in the illustrative palette. So except those are illustrative, but we would anticipate those being the guide for future detailed designs and for the code really to pick that up in terms of the more general need to consider and to make sure that trees are suitable for those conditions.
Okay, and I think sorry, Lee.
So if I can just add, we do have a selection of tree varieties existing at the Jardin de la Mer presently, and those trees have been now established probably since the park was installed and have performed well within that environment.
Thank you. It's just to try and understand the tensions between trees that are planted in above basement soil containers and trees that are planted in ground. And my understanding is in-ground planting is generally much better for trees and allows greater maturation. So just to draw back to the question, if you wouldn't mind, on how long the trees would take to reach the stage where wind mitigation could be expected. I'm sure it's in the code, so forgive me for not finding it.
I believe, I mean, this might be one that's best to deal with when we come on to the amenity conversation when we have RWDI here later in the afternoon in terms of what's exactly been tested. My understanding is that they've tested those based on the planted sizes, but I think that might be best to pick up when we have RWDI joining.
Thank you, and I'm sorry to keep pressing. May I just raise one other issue, and then I'm...
Of course,
I'm,
yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And that was one of the big challenges of this site that I think we've all wrestled with as we've been thinking it through, is the dealing with the severance of the site across La Rue de Libération. And one of the issues is how we deal with the current state, which is it is a 4-lane road. Obviously, on page 77 of the DAS, you've talked about the future state, which is really positive. It's whether there is extra planting that should or could go into the edge of that road, and whether that could be in ground rather than above a basement. Again, given the level of detail, I'm unsure whether that's in ground or basement planting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something, as you say, it's been a challenge throughout. It's something that we've had lots of discussions with the JSC and with yourselves about. And I think that, you know, it's, to give the kind of background on it, I suppose there was this idea of having a kind of more of a engineered solution to deal with the severance and to potentially have a raised bridge over the road. That was something that we, on discussion with the JAC, was removed from the plans. I think it was considered to be sort of overly engineered, overly costly in terms of carbon and monetary cost, but also very inflexible in terms of kind of the potential for the road to be adapted in the future for potentially lower traffic. So the direction that we went in, sort of steered by the JSC, was a kind of a simpler approach. Sometimes simpler approaches are better approaches, and instead of an engineered solution to create that at-grade single-phase crossing across the road along that kind of key axis, and combined with that to de-engineer the road as far as possible with planting, tree planting in particular. And that's something that shaped the setbacks of the massing from the road. So I think if we find the relevant page in the codes, if we can go to page 72 of the codes onwards, which talks about the Rue de Libération. So I think in answer to the question on the basement, these trees along the road would all be in ground, not above basement, so they would be unlimited in terms of soil depths. The section on page 73 gives you the offsets of the buildings generally, and although they vary to some extent, they're generally sort of between 8 and 12 metres, so a very significant offset that allows space for canopy size as well. And the trees have been set back rather than having them sort of immediately on the verge, which obviously can cause issues in terms of visibility. We've tried to set those back as part of the kind of separation between segregated pedestrian and cycle routes, so that they have the space for canopy to grow on both sides. And combined with that, we've also got the greening of the central reservation and tree planting within that. The central reservation is widened actually from its current width to allow some additional space for tree planting as well. And there is some in-ground lower level planting incorporated within that kind of buffer zone as well. The other thing that we think works very well in terms of kind of greening a street is allowing some space between the back of the footway and the buildings for incorporating some greening along the edges there, and that's something that's included in the setback of the massing and shown within that section in the codes, and that really helps kind of soften the building edges. It's not something you'd have along the whole length of the street, but something that's provided as a buffer between where buildings are set back to give some kind of rhythm and sequence to the street as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, just remember.
Sorry, can I just make one point? Sorry, my name's Mark Woodall. I'm a consultee. I'm here particularly for the ecological aspects, terrestrial ecological aspects today of the natural environment. I just want to make one point about trees. The applicant's documents refer to the planting of over 500 trees with the scheme, which is obviously very welcome. And to accommodate that, there's provision, I think, for a temporary nursery facility in the recognition that trees will need to be brought in probably, along with a number of other plants and shrubs. That gives the opportunity for those trees that are brought in to acclimatise to some of the conditions. It also helps to meet some of the biosecurity requirements and regulations that are in place in Jersey. What isn't clear, given that this is a phased development, is where that nursery might be established. But broadly speaking, we welcome that sort of provision, and it's something that we, you may recall, we started talking to the applicant in the previous hospital development about, as they were planning on bringing in a lot of plant material as well.
Yep. I think, as you rightly say, there's a I think on page 94 of the codes, I think we've got code 41028, temporary tree and plant nursery shall be considered as part of the meanwhile strategy. In terms of the location of that, I think that the phasing offers sort of various options for that. I think that's something that would need to be developed once the detailed phasing plan is progressed.
And I think, again, this is one of the challenges of the application. I don't want to go over ground again, but this is a landscape-led with landscape as a reserve matter. The level of detail is high, but in key areas, the wording within the codes could be considered to be less than strong, so considered rather than it shall. And when it's items such as wind mitigation, it's items such as well-being and creating public spaces for both residents and residents of the town. Those are concerns. So those are some of the tensions between the codification and the outline nature of the application. But again, that is in my proof of evidence, so we will not rehash that.
Okay, I guess these issues of severance and connectivity are going to crop up later in the week, particularly when we talk about the transport issues. But I'm understanding what I can see in front of me, that in terms of the landscape master plan, on that road, the proposals are effectively an at-grade crossing, pedestrian crossing, and some greening through tree planting in a reservoir. I don't think there's anything in the middle of the road there at the moment, is there? There's nothing there. No. And greening on the edges.
Yeah.
But maybe on Thursday we'll have that. I think it is Thursday. We've got it's Wednesday, tomorrow, isn't it? It's Wednesday, the transport session. We'll have those discussions a little more about other options, bridges, road narrowing, and what has actually been explored, and perhaps why, Mr. Conn, you can explain why you've settled with. It feels like you, from a landscape perspective, you're working with that constraint as best you can, but without changing it really. It's still a 6-lane road.
Yeah. Do you want me to come back on that now, or
You can do.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we explored extensively, and as you say, we can go into this more in detail in the transport session, but something that was explored with IHE and with WSP, the transport consultants, in terms of whether there was potential to narrow the road. I think that the JSE feedback, actually the latest feedback, acknowledges that this would need to be part of a much wider sort of rethink of transport strategy and infrastructure in the area. It's a wider piece of work. which is not within the sort of gift of this application to deliver. I think what we have been very conscious of doing is to make sure that nothing within this prevents any sort of narrowing of the road or further de-engineering of the road later on. And there were some studies done, actually, which I think were referenced earlier on, about what this road might look like if traffic is able to be reduced. It's something that was explored with IHE and was deemed not to be possible at this time. But it's certainly something that we have explored the options for.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll pick that up. It is tomorrow, it's session 7, first session tomorrow. Okay. Let me just go through my notes for a minute, then I'll just see if we've got the questions. Yeah, Mr. Henry, you could just, you mentioned that in Le Jardin de la Mer, the trees that are planted there, they were put in when it was laid out. That's that block of trees, is it, at the back of the garden adjacent to the road? Because they look quite mature now.
Yes, that's correct.
Right, and they were planted roughly when?
That would have been probably mid-90s.
Mid-90s. And that, it's a mix of that sort of fir trees and I think there's some oak in there, isn't there?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. Evergreen oaks and a number of sort of pine trees. Stone pines have performed well on the in the area as well. We've planted some recently as part of the temporary Le Jardin car park. So there's some stone pines in that vicinity as well.
So you draw on experience of what's kind of up to the job there in that relatively exposed location, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, let me just see if there's any questions. Mr. Young.
Thanks, sir. I'll try and be brief. I thought that discussion, if I might say so, was very informative because I certainly wish to speak on the issue of transport. I was very impressed with the work that we had explained, the thought being given of how we could cope with trying to mitigate what is a horrendous 6-lane motorway tearing the heart out of St Helier. How we could mitigate it with landscaping. I was impressed with the detail there. But it doesn't remove my reservations. I certainly ended up, like you, sir, with the impression that the team have worked within the constraints that we have to accept it as it is, because we can't do anything about traffic flows in town. I don't accept that at all, I think. Anyway, moving on from that, I think the other point is about implementation. And I think Tracy is right, Ms. Ingle, that given the nature of this procedural issue of the application, we've got an application with all matters reserved and we've got codes that we rely on, is how we can be confident that if consent is given, that these things that are vital on which the whole future of applications, one after the other for 12 years is going to depend, will actually happen. I think, so I picked up what Mr. Henry said there, is that SOJDC would be content to have it included as a condition on the consent. Now, I have actually I have confidence in SOJDC's commitment to do maintenance of public realm. I think their record has been good. But I have to say the state's record has generally been poor, absolutely poor. It's well notorious that we have conditions applied and they just don't get done. They get budget cuts, we get all the nonsense of cutting budgets and then maintenance budgets goes. So while my request, sir, if this is to be relied on, I personally would like to see it upgraded to a planning obligation agreement, which would put in place a long-term funded proposal, probably requiring some kind of financial device so that there is security for the long-term maintenance and ensuring that that landscaping is allowed to grow, mature and progress and be looked after in future years. And if, as Minister, that's the modification to your report, sir, that I made in the hospital application to upgrade, because equally where you have a major development that absolutely relies on landscaping as mitigation, it's not just a minor matter, it's absolutely to make sure that the vision and the whole process is, you know, long-term. It's a long-term thing. Trees are going to take 15 to 20 years before we see that effect. It's really important. A planning obligation agreement means that somebody's got the legal rights to enforce it if there's any shortcomings on that. And so I suppose I'm still left with the issue, sir, of how, you know, even though we have a planning obligation agreement, there's so much detail in the codes that, you know, we will need to do. But I think, you know, I thought that was the very, you know, the fact that so much thought was being given to the landscaping, I very much value. But, you know, I certainly want to hear why it is that the transport consultants think that we can carry on with this 6-lane highway. I mean, it's awful. It's a motorway to nowhere. It's through the middle of the town. How we can be confident that the measures and the changes that are planned, which are modest, really will create a better environment for the people that are going to be living alongside this road. And so I think that's all I wanted to say, sir. Thank you. Is that a question? If there are, if members of the team can give me confidence or maybe agree with me. Do you agree with me? That might be a useful question.
Well, I think it's probably one for the transport session tomorrow, where we'll ask those questions.
All right.
But I could ask, we've also got a session on conditions and planning obligations later in the week, but your suggestion around maintenance, I've just made a note for that session and I'll ask that question then.
Thank you.
Mr. Vibert.
I have a question, please. Having looked at the drawings and plans and at the model, there doesn't seem to be any access to the beach in front of the whole of this development. It would mean that people living on the waterfront who live down there near the harbour have got to walk to West Park to be able to get to the beach. Now, I may have been mistaken, I may have missed something, but it seems to me that it's not on the model, therefore it's not in consideration. And I would like some assurance from the team that in fact they will, if they go ahead with this, make access for people on the beach, to get on the beach.
Yes, so the main access to the beach is via the relocated slipway adjacent to the cafe on the newly reclaimed land. I think that the detail of the detailed design of the seawall, which obviously needs to be raised as part of these proposals, needs to be worked through. But I think there may be options to provide access via the tiered cedar fence as exists currently. I think that is something that would need to be worked through in detailed design. I don't think there aren't any plans to provide any additional access to the beach besides the slipway.
If I can just add, sir, it certainly would be the intention to link into the existing stepped access to the scallop seating that exists and will be retained as part of the scheme.
So you would be able to access through the new coastal defence?
Yes.
Because they're quite popular routes, aren't they? I mean, I walk around there and people do use them. And it's a bit of a gathering point in the evenings. Okay, any more questions? Mr. McCarthy.
It was a bit disappointing to read in the press that how confused everybody is from the beginning of this whole public inquiry. And I think for the public, if the professionals are confused, the public are confused. And what is the public, how can the public be consulted and participate if they're confused? Because what happens is you belittle people. because you make them, they can't understand. And that's for all ages. So I know I speak about, as a person, as a human being, trying to share my professional knowledge with the public, so the public feel more confident that they can participate. And it'd be interesting how many members of the public will turn out on Thursday evening, where anybody can speak, and it'd be great to hear what their views are. But of course, this is the landscape section. And to help understand, landscape is hugely important for this island, and it is well known worldwide as one of the best natural landscapes in the world, and its horticulture expertise is unequaled. But what is also happening, we're living in a changing world, so we're talking about urban farming. This project's going to last for 10 years, so there's going to be a lot more urban farming going on in the future. And we've got all the recipes. We've got the know-how, we've got the climate, and what I'm amazed about, there is no urban farming on this site. The other bit is, and this is terribly important, the taxpayer pays for Jersey Architectural Commission to assist as a friendly partner this developer, who is a government developer, on making use of public land for the public to provide housing for the public. They're employed. Now, so we can try and understand this, there is 2 planning applications. The first planning application was submitted in December 21. The Jersey architecture, the second planning application was carried out in December 22. Now, in May 22, the Jersey Architectural Commission reviewed the scheme. They did not review the planning application we're looking at today. So what was terribly important is that when they reviewed it in May 22, and this development has not addressed their concerns, and in December 22, the public were consulted, but they did not have a review provided by the Jersey Architectural Commission, who they pay for, so they could review their comments and then comment on the application on that basis. Now, I think I'm not going to get into the details, time is short, but let's just pick up one example of the comments made in the pre-application. The courtyard roof decks, such as amenity spaces, are often underused because there is no shelter, no toilets, no sunny spots are fleeting, so they become spaces merely to look down upon. That's it. It's just to look down upon. Now, the bit I would add on to looking down on is the detail, how important the detail is. A planter above ground, which is what you're going to have to do. You cannot put a planter in the middle of the car park. The tree roots go in the car park. We all know that. They go into planters above ground. Jersey has a water shortage. We have hosepipe bans. All those planters will have to have irrigated water supply, or they will die. But what do we do when there's a hosepipe ban? So those people looking out of their luxury flats, they can look at their trees, but the other people lose their vegetable patch because they can't water it. So I think this is terribly important, the detail. And this leads to the next statement made by the Jersey Architectural Commission after the planning application had been submitted, after the public consultation period had been closed. Okay, after. And they state, their opening statement, for this truly landscape-led plan, the landscape design would need to be a full and detailed planning application now, today. Not tomorrow, today. Not one of numerous reserved matters, applications to resolve at a later date. That's it. So as far as they're concerned, this is not a landscape-led design. That's from the Jersey Architectural Commission, the best people from the country, from the UK. The other bit is, I'm not going to go into every detail of your
Are
scheme.
you going to get to a question, Mr.
No, the
McCarthy?
question, well, the fundamental question is, I'm moving now from landscape to beach. This is Jersey, St. Helier's waterfront, their beachfront. There's no consideration there is a beach. Show me one image of people on the beach at the moment, and then I'll talk about images. Next thing I'll talk about landscape, and where is the disabled access? From this debate, you cannot directly access the beach with a pram, with a wheelchair, with walking difficulties. So can't we understand that one of the most important drivers for the future of St. Helier is as a beach town, not only for the residents, but also for those that work? Where are the Hobie cats at lunch? So you go sailing with your mates at lunchtime to take out the stress. Where can you go for an early morning swim in sunlight in a swimming pool that's shadowed by which is overshadowed by the sun? Where can you meet in the evening for those barbecues and go again with the Hobie cats and volleyball? Where are they? There are no images of this. Gone. None. Because you have done a landscape design, which is lipstick on a monstrous scheme, that does not consider at all the beach. It could be 50,000 miles away. This is the fundamental problem, is we want our beach back. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McCarthy. Any more questions?
Can we just pick up one comment there in terms of the beach access?
Yep.
So one of the things that we have done as part of developing the design for the Western Park Gateway is to consult with the Beachability organisation who have fed into the design of the slipway in terms of gradients and also in terms of the facilities provided in the relocated cafe. And something that they were very keen on was having some storage facilities and other things to assist with beach access within there. And that's something that's included in the codes.
Sorry, I think Beachability are a charity specifically providing access to beaches around the island for people who may not have ease of access as others.
And I just want to clarify again on this point of soil depth and raised planters. The soil depth is provided above the basement and below the paving finished floor. So you have a paved surface, a tree that's flush with that, and then you have a volume of soil beneath the surface. The basement, in terms of the maximum parameter depth, has been set out based on having that difference, that volume that you can use for that. And in our extensive experience of planting trees in urban environments, the depths that are allowed are sufficient for the tree to act very similarly to a tree planted in ground.
Could I just raise one question? Sorry, thank you. Just in response to Mr. McCarthy's comment about irrigation, which actually is a valid concern, I just mentioned policy UI3 of the Bridging Island Plan, which calls for a water conservation statement to be submitted with an application. It is something we did flag in our proof that hadn't been provided, but perhaps the applicant could just point to any sections within the design code which address the issue of water conservation and irrigation. Thank you.
John, are you picking the water conservation? Yes, it is referenced
here. Yeah. So we've got two approaches to water conservation.
Yep.
Bearing in mind this is an outline application and the detailed matters will include the specific arrangements for these matters. The sustainability statement confirms the approach to the matters which the team will confirm at the detailed design stage, which is a full regulatory consenting process. So the sustainability statement talks about the potential for rainwater harvesting, etc. The second point, sorry, there's actually 3 points. The second point is in the design codes, which reference the need for low flow fixtures, fittings for the kind of hard environment. It also deals with the construction phase as well. I don't have the exact code reference to hand, but I'm sure we can find that for you in a moment. And the third point is that the landscape-led approach deals with a huge amount of water-related issues through the approach to in-ground planting, rather than other ways which would be more water hungry. It also deals with a lot of de-engineering of the water and drainage environment through bioswales, etc. So we think there are 3 places where that is referenced in the context of the details to be submitted at the detailed stage of the application process.
Okay. Right, okay, let's move on to natural environment. And
if we may, sorry.
Sorry.
I seem to have a habit of this, of coming back at the end of everyone's.
yeah, I'm getting used to it, Mr. Nicholson.
I think I've got 4 points that I just want to hopefully provide clarification on. First of all, I mentioned a moment ago, this is a 2-stage consenting process. This is an outline application with all matters reserved. We are quite content, as Mr. Young and Ms. Ingle have identified, that if there is considered to be insufficient control through a statutory regulatory process of a reserved matters application, then we are happy to review the need for conditions or a planning obligation agreement to secure matters which appear to be preeminent in some people's considerations. That's the first point. The second point is, we've touched on it before, a landscape-led approach does not mean all the detailed planting plans are submitted at day 1. I can refer you to section 1.5 of the design and access statement, where that's explained. A landscape-led framework does not mean all the details need to be required at day 1. It is about understanding the role that landscape can play in delivering successful places, in supporting environmental objectives, and providing an environment where it will become an asset to the town and for the residents. So, and I've mentioned it before, so page 13 is a clear example of what is meant by the landscape-led framework. And if you want an example of how that has come into practice, then we've talked about the public realm and streetscape of the dual carriageway. That isn't just about whether trees can be accommodated, the depth of planting, etc. But the landscape-led approach, through that example that was discussed, it is about changing the character of this place. The road is a barrier. It is not an attractive part of town. It is harsh. It is full of hard urban realm. And the approach to dealing with that road will change the perception through the use of landscape. That has benefits for ecology. It has benefits for climate resilience. It has benefits for creating a human environment, which is very, very different to that which is found today. The spaces are generous, the planting is generous, and again, the example which we used was section 4.8.6 in relation to the prescription of future development in the for approval design codes. So that was the second point about what is meant by the landscape-led approach and examples of what it will do. Right, the third point is, I don't think Patrick's sold Gillespie's enough at all. The project had a desire to work slightly differently through this landscape-led approach, and that led to the appointment of Gillespie's, who are a preeminent landscape practice. They have brought a wealth of experience from, I know it's often quite seen as a negative thing, but they've brought a wealth of experience and best practice from off-island and are working way beyond the ability of any landscape practice in Jersey. And it has been a step change from any project that I've ever seen on the island in relation to the way that landscape has evolved through the experience, track record and knowledge of Gillespie's. And that was a deliberate decision by the team. So the idea that landscape needs to be given more emphasis is perhaps a problem that we've caused ourselves in perceptions through the, we've opened up Pandora's box through the good work that has been done to date. Fourth point is about JDC and the successful places they've created through their track record of landscape. We spoke about Les Jardins and the way that the landscape was matured there. We have Trenton Square, which has exactly the same approach to the in-ground planting and the way that the trees are delivered. We have College Gardens, which is a listed building set in a formal set-piece lawn. I think, having lived and worked in other places, that the way that JDC and the parish of St Helier in particular manage and look after some of the public open spaces is an asset to the community and is part of the wider character that people who visit and live here enjoy and benefit from. So the fourth thing is, and I'm sitting here on behalf of JDC, but I think their track record is evident to anyone who walks around the island, and that is a positive in relation to the intent for this application as well, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McCarthy. Quick question. If it turns into, I will stop you if it turns into a speech.
I think there's fine. On the question of, again, now you've just stated that you've done a great job on the design of the Rue de Liberation. No, you haven't, because the Jersey Architecture Commission states this still appears an unappealing monolithic cliff. So that's their comment. The other aspect is, fantastic, you've got Gillespie's, you appointed them, you didn't appoint them, was it a public competition? So you invited the public to look at all the different landscape architects they could use around the world? And then, but still, I'm not disrespecting, they're very good landscape architects, but are they going to be the landscape consultant designing the detailed design of all the landscape, including the landscape within the building footprints for this project? Because what you're saying is we're giving you the very best landscape architect in the world. Can you assure us that is the landscape architect who will do the detailed design and oversee and supervise the whole landscape project?
I can assure you that whoever designs the landscape works will have to meet the regulatory bars set by a full planning application. If it isn't good enough, whoever designs it, if I did it, Patrick did it, or Lee did it, it will be refused. So I think the point is, it's anti-competitive if firms are...
You say no? So you're saying no?
That cannot be guaranteed.
No, so the public, so I'm helping the public understand this. You have praised, quite rightly, one of the best landscape architects in the world, but they're fantastic. They've done a planning application which fails Jersey Architectural professional opinion that it's not a landscape-led job. It's a poor landscape design. It does not address the issues of what humans actually need. And now you're telling us they're not going to be the landscape architect?
No, I haven't
anyway.
told you that
But
at
you're,
all,
no,
Mr.
but you're not guaranteeing.
I have not told you that at all, Mr.
So it's
McCarthy.
irrelevant.
I've been crystal clear. If it's not good enough, whoever designs it, it
No,
will
no,
not be
no,
approved.
but you're praising a landscape architect who you're not committing to employ on the project.
Sorry.
So,
We are, as you have rightly said, a government entity. And as Mr. Nicholson highlighted, it would be anti-competitive if we were to guarantee Gillespie's an open check to design the entire project. I'm sure they'd be delighted to continue with the design work. And we equally would be delighted if they continued. However, we have to go through an open tender process in the same way as we had an open tender process on their initial appointment.
Yes.
And there was a panel of judges that included the government officials on the selection and appointment of Gillespie's.
yes, and that's where it goes back to the Jersey Architecture Commission saying this is not a landscape-led job because Gillespie's have not provided the detailed design. And there is no commitment. We're going into nothing. Everything we've seen on these drawings means nothing. Okay, so we're very clear, so the public are aware of this. All those beautiful pictures you've seen of landscape and trees and where they're going mean nothing because they don't have to build that. They could just have no trees.
Well, Mr. McCarthy, we're going through points which have been identified in every session. This is an outline application with all matters reserved. That's the position of the application. Yes. The design intent is secured through the codes. It will be subject to full regulatory approvals or not through detailed reserved matters. If it's not good enough, it will not be approved.
But I'm saying to you, you stated, this is your landscape architect. We have selected for this project. They're fantastic. So giving the public false assurance.
No, for this application.
Look, I'm going to stop this because I'm not writing anything down. And when I stop writing things down, it means no one's hitting the target. I need to focus on drawing out elements of the evidence that I can use to give advice to the Minister. I understand the passion and the interest about this issue, but it's just not something I'm going to cover. Mr. Vibert.
Is it a time to raise a question that Mr. Young dealt with on conditions, or is there a session that's going to...
There's a session on conditions later in the week.
That you would be laying down?
Yes. Yes.
So there's a session dealing with that, is there? Or can I do it now?
Well, you ask it now. There's no need to come up to the table. Just say it. And
I just want to make a point about conditions, that the situation in Jersey has been recently that conditions that, for instance, laid down in 1984 for a development in the island has now been deemed to be useless, not worth having, and don't apply. So what happens with conditions if planning or other organisations don't like it? They simply say they don't apply anymore, and that's the danger, unless you can tighten it up in a resolution that you might bring, as John Young has suggested.
well, we'll pick that up in the conditions session about the robustness of conditions and whether they need to be legal obligations. Okay. Right. If I could just, well, is there any more from the Planning Authority on?
No, thank you.
No. Right. Mr. Nixon, are you happy I'll move on to
Thank you, sir. There were my 4 points.
natural environment and biodiversity?
Thank you.
And I think this is hopefully just a confirmation of what I think I've read. My understanding is that in the environmental impact assessment, terrestrial ecology was effectively scoped out at an early stage. And I think that's confirmed in the consultation response from Land Resources Management, which you'll find at document CR11B. There is an ecological impact assessment dated November 2021, and it assesses all habitats are planted and managed for amenity purposes. So I think what I'm taking from all of that evidence in terms of my advice to the Minister is there's nothing much to see there in terms of natural environment.
At present, correct. Yeah.
Yeah, we would agree.
Yes, agree with that. I just had one question around the shelf life of the survey. I think the survey was November 2021, and I know with ecology reports you have to, well, they only have a limited shelf life and you have to redo them. And given that this development has a long potential implementation period, I just posed the question, and it might be something for the condition session, whether resurvey is needed at various points and what those points would be.
Yeah, if I might, best practice guidelines, I think as we refer in our submission, do require survey data to be continually validated. Really, given the nature of the proposals and the duration of the phasing, we'd suggested that at each phase, a review of the data that was collected at the outset is undertaken by a qualified ecologist. We are expecting significant changes, but at least that provides the provision to check that. And I think from what I've seen of the applicant's documents, they're committing to that in their codes as well. So we'd be happy, you know, given the results that we've got so far from the survey perspective, we aren't expecting significant changes, and so that's why we're happy with that sort of approach.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. The final item in this section is on marine ecology.
Sorry, can I just want to raise a couple of points about ecology, if I can.
Oh, sorry, yes, please do.
In terms of the findings of the surveys, you know, we are in general agreement with those findings and happy with the way forward. Where we've sort of had some questions in our responsing is around the issue of biodiversity net gain and whether we could reasonably expect at this stage to have a more detailed assessment to comply with what our interpretation of the policies as is. We certainly accept that at the moment the definition around biodiversity net gain in Jersey is not detailed. It actually sits as a proposal in the island plan. But there is provision within the current Bridging Island plan to...
Is it?
I think it's proposal 12 of the NE section of the bit.
It is
Page 114. The preamble to the proposal and sort of suggests that in seeking to define what biodiversity net gain might look like in Jersey, the Minister is seeking to encourage applicants, particularly public bodies and arm's length organisations, to demonstrate how that might be achieved. We have worked with some applicants, obviously this is not mandatory, but we have worked with some applicants to develop a kind of a Jersey version of the biodiversity net gain metric that's currently being used in the UK, which has just recently been updated to version 4, to try and understand, quantify, if you like, the actual biodiversity net gain of the scheme. Now, the applicant has suggested that they might look to make an assessment of biodiversity net gain at the start of each phasing of the development. And our question really is whether we could get a bit more commitment up front for the whole of the scheme to get more surety of delivery. Now, the enhancement measures broadly that have been proposed, you know, we accept they're the right kind of measures that we would expect to be put in place. I guess you know, and given the nature of the site as currently is, the likelihood is that there will be gain. What we don't really get is a kind of quantifiable valuation, if you like. And that's a matter of debate, really, as to whether that's seen as a requirement or not. But our view is that the policy suggests that the applicant should make some effort to demonstrate that quantifiable gain.
Okay. Well, I was just looking at the policy NE2, and it doesn't reference biodiversity net gain metric.
So under policy NE1, sorry.
Anyone?
It doesn't reference the metric, but it is an expectation that there'll be a gain in biodiversity. And then it goes on to talk about biodiversity net gain as a principle and obviously the development of the proposal. Similarly, the applicant has made some references to the urban greening factor to sort of more broadly describe the green infrastructure on site. Again, the development of green infrastructure is linked to the quantifying of biodiversity net gain, because obviously a lot of the mechanisms, green infrastructure will affect the ability to, the opportunities for ecology and biodiversity. There is a kind of crude calculation of the urban greening factor, which is kind of like a London-based equivalent of how you can calculate that in the design and access statement, I think, which is welcome. But again, our question is whether an application of this scale could provide a little bit more detail as to exactly how that's delivered, how that's calculated.
Okay. Well, let's ask them.
So the question of biodiversity net gain, like you said, we intend to show it using the DEFRA biodiversity metric. At this stage, it's not possible to quantify because it really depends on the final landscape proposals, the habitats that will be created, and how they'll be managed. So that would be dealt with for each phase in the reserve matters application. But a way of dealing with this that we discussed with yourselves was to agree between ourselves and you a minimum percentage increase in biodiversity net gain for each phase of the development, and that would recognise that some phases of the development had less opportunity for net gain because there was less green space, but they would still meet a minimum, whereas some phases of the development would far surpass that. So yeah, at the minute, it's not possible to put a figure on that, but the broad enhancement proposals document does show our intention to include habitats that are important for wildlife, grasslands, woodlands, integrated wildlife features and things like that that would be included in all phases of the development.
Just to pick up on the point on urban greening factor, as you rightly say, it is something that we've looked at. We've done a calculation based on the illustrative scheme, but there is also a commitment within the design codes. I think it's page 110 of the summary codes, that the development as a whole must achieve the benchmark score of 0.4 urban greening factor. Based on the GLA calculator, which is the benchmark for residential development, which is a higher benchmark than you would get for a commercial development.
Yeah, that's accepted. I think that's welcome. I guess we're going back to the point about whether, I know landscaping is a reserve matter, but given that landscaping is what's contributing to biodiversity on site and the ability to deliver green infrastructure, our question really is whether it's right to have a bit more detail at this stage or not. And I'm not going to replay that debate that you had yesterday and you've started to have today as well.
Thank you. Okay, that's good. Okay, what about marine ecology? Could we move on to that, or is that common ground?
We have submissions in the ES, chapter 15.
Yep.
I have read through those, and the conclusions seem to be self-explanatory, sir. I think there have been some comments from the Marine Resources team which accepts those conclusions. I'm not aware of any diversion from that position, sir.
Yeah, I would also just confirm that the marine ecology team have provided consultation feedback, and yeah, Mr. Nicholson's summary is accurate, that there's no points of disagreement.
I wanted to ask that question because I read it and it picked up a couple of issues, but it felt like it was like nitpicking. It's almost like typo type stuff.
Yeah, as opposed to some in principle
I
fundamental.
just wanted to sense check that there's no fundamental
Not,
issues there.
not that we've been made aware of.
Okay. Well, I'll just go to the gallery. We've had those discussions there on biodiversity and marine ecology. I think you've heard what's been said, but happy to take any questions before we go to a break. Mr. Young.
I mean, interesting discussion again. But a couple of the questions did occur to me. On the marine side, I think probably the biggest issue that would arise for me is the issues of marine pollution, which obviously I'm assuming we're going to be dealing
We'll deal with on Thursday.
because, you know, as you know, we have a shellfish industry which has got those beds on the southeast of the island, and I think the past there is monitoring of the seawater, particularly looking for by bacterial contamination and also heavy metals. And of course that does affect the industry. If we there's a very strict protocol of how many samples are taken and so on, and the frequency of those samples. And if those tests report badly, then that does affect directly the grading and the economy of that product. So it's not an insignificant matter, because we've found there have been incidents of pollution from the waterfront area. But, you know, we're going to go into the sources of that. But obviously the marine environment is very, very at risk. The other thing I want to ask, people might laugh at this, I suppose, is about what the strategy is for managing and dealing with seagull, urban gull population in that area. Because obviously St Helier is generally a nesting area for many urban gulls, and we do suffer a problem and so on. So I don't know if any thought's been given that, or do maybe some people see them as rats with wings, but they are part of natural ecosystems, and hopefully we will also get bird life in these. If the landscaping comes good, hopefully we'll see that. So I don't know if the team are able to comment in any way that we're not just saying, well, it's a dead area, we're not interested in it, there's nothing there. Put that out there.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely our hope as well that the scheme attracts a lot of wildlife. We'll be incorporating wildlife boxes within the buildings and shrubs and trees and things like that. So that's our intention. Gulls are a protected species here, and they're around the coast, so it's likely that gulls will nest on flat roofs and things like that. In terms of them affecting the public, I'm not sure that that's something we've got a scheme for or considered at this point.
I'm not sure we have that much control over what the seagulls do.
No.
I think, if I may say, unless I'm wrong, I don't think that gulls can be just treated as vermin, as it were. I think they are still subject to statutory protection in Jersey.
Harriet's just said.
But they do need management, because obviously they will nest in places, because they'll treat it as, if we build what are artificial cliffs beside the sea, we don't need to be surprised that gulls see it as a base, to nesting and things like that. And that does cause a lot of issues for people, around the place. So I'm hoping that there will be some strategy in the developments for how gulls are managed. You can't sort of control them, but you can certainly manage them, I think, through That's right. Anyway, I'll put it out there. It's an issue to take away, I think.
I'll note it down as a potential condition. Thank you.
I might just add, Harriet's rightly said that gulls are protected species. They're actually quite vulnerable species globally, and we should probably consider ourselves lucky that we have so much opportunity to see them close up. I think most of the issues around gulls are a result of people's behaviour, public behaviour, and anything we can do to improve people's awareness of what they should and shouldn't do around the coastline is something that we fully support. But certainly this scheme would likely attract gulls onto flat roofs, given the nature of the proposals for the roof, and that has to be seen as a good thing more broadly.
Okay, any more questions on ecology? Okay, right, let's take a break for 10 minutes. We'll come back at 11:05. And we'll continue then with session 5.
Inspector, could I just make a request? When we come back for the next session, could we request that school and early years provision is dealt with as the first?
So school?
School and early years provision.
Yeah.
Our consultee is here, but has to go for...
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you very much.
calculations on density. Whichever way you split it.
Okay, if we could resume.
Yep, we're on again.
Okay. Okay, so we're moving now into session 5, which is covering quite a wide range of issues related to housing, population, employment and health. And we're going to take these slightly out of order due to witness availability. We're going to go to school and early years provision first of all. And do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Paul Sturzacre from Children and People Education and Skills. I'm the Service Manager for Business Support and lead on school admissions.
Okay, thank you. Now let me just do a little bit of scene setting on this particular topic, school and early years provision. My starting point is I look at the environmental impact assessment, and that has assessed the impact on early years, primary schools and secondary schools. And I think they're all minor adverse effects, not significant in brackets, and we'll come on to what all of that means. And I've also got the proof of evidence of the Planning Authority written by Ms Johnson, and that's got a section in its 7.4 which addresses education, but it's kind of left a little bit open, like there are still discussions ongoing. So it would be useful, sir, if you could explain to me the position in terms of, perhaps if we break it down into early years, primary and secondary.
So for early years and primary, so for early years nursery, we're talking about the provision in a primary school, so I'll cover it early years and primary, if that's okay. This is what we would call Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2. So position in terms of primary schools in St Helier is that, as you know, we're likely to be building a new primary school around Gas Place. We don't anticipate forms of entry or the numbers of forms within the sort of town area to increase. We think that that's going to stay the same if we're looking at the estate that we've got. That provision that we've got at the moment, with the number of forms of entry that we've got at the moment, is absolutely adequate for everything that we've had in the past. So, for instance, at the moment we've got a board year in year 6 of, I think it's 1,189 children in the cohort, and to put into perspective in terms of birth rates, that's going down to, I think next year it drops to 875 going into reception. So there's a huge difference, and we can already cope with board years, as it were, in terms of opening extra classes in certain schools. So whilst we know that the catchment area for this site, for this development is Rouge Billion, we know that Rouge can't and won't be able to accommodate all of the children from the development, but we are confident that within the town schools we will be able to house all of the children, certainly at primary and nursery.
So just, if I may, if I just sum that up in terms of what I think I'm hearing, that with known and planned new capacity, you don't anticipate that the pupil yield from this development will cause any issues that can't be accommodated?
Yeah, they can be mitigated in terms of policy, in terms of we go with catchment areas, so we know that we won't be able to house all of the children in one catchment area, which is Rouge currently, but with town schools, none of them are too far away, so we're looking at Deverne as a 3-form of entry school. Regularly is 2 forms of entry, so we can add a form of entry there. Janvin has got space, more often than not has got space virtually in every year group. The new development will be a 2-form of entry school. So yeah, there's space across the system within the town basin.
Okay. Well, that's helpful. I assume the applicant just notes that.
Yes, so you listed out the, in your comments earlier about where the material that's already part of the application, where it touches on schools. The witness has provided a consultation response, which is also on the planning register, making the very same points.
I'm not sure I saw that one actually. What would that be titled as, your department?
SIPES, Children and Young People Education Schools, possibly could be under education.
I'm not sure it's an inquiry document. It's a consultation.
Hang on, there is children and young people. We've got CR 20A and 20B.
Got it. Thank you.
Right, that's helpful.
So basically, we expect the development to yield, in terms of extra children in primary, 153 children across 7 year groups.
Okay. And with regard to secondary schooling?
In terms of secondary schooling, so that it's in catchment for Hope Valley. Hope Valley are regularly, so it's a school that's built for 7 forms of entry and is regularly 5 or 6 forms of entry. I think this year is the first, September 23 will be the first time it's been 7 forms of entry for a number of years. And that is because we're in a bulge year. We don't anticipate, we anticipate, that there's 146 extra children across 5 year groups. We could accommodate that by making Hope Valley an extra form of entry per year on their norm of 6 to a norm of 7. Again, we don't anticipate that this development causes any problems in terms of housing secondary school children.
Okay, well, that's straightforward. Any questions on Mr. Young?
Yes, I think it was me who probably raised this in the papers, so obviously there seems to be a consensus that we don't have to worry about schools. We can cope with the children that will arise from the existing availability. I think my questions are really the first opportunity I've ever had to talk direct to SIPES persons, so I'm going to, if you are permission, since the public might be interested, I'm going to ask the questions. First of all, can you tell us what is... I understood that Rouge-Brion School, which is an existing school, has to be replaced. Can you tell me what the state's plans are to do that? Because obviously if that's unresolved, that's an uncertainty which is hanging around at the time of this development.
It is still unresolved. There is still plans to replace Rouge with like-for-like amount of forms of entry. The discussion around site is still to be resolved.
Okay, so there's an uncertainty there. How many children currently at Rouge-Brion School?
You bear with me a second. Let's see if we can get on this offline.
Roughly will do. Don't know the exact figure.
Well, it's a 2 form of entry. I mean, I can tell you what it will take. It's 2 forms of entry. You can take 28 children per form over 7 years.
Right, so it's about 56 kids times 7 years. That's 350, 400. Okay, thank you. When I was a States member, it was widely spoken of is that there was a report that said that we needed 2 primary schools in the town area, 2 new ones. Can you confirm that or otherwise, or was that just a bad rumour?
No, that's correct. We're still looking at 2 primary schools, 1 for replacement for Rouge and Gas Place.
Right, so 1 for replacement of Rouge and 1 for what? For
the Gas Place.
Gas Place?
Yeah.
Okay, so why is Gas Place likely to generate large number of children that we will have to reply a school for and the Waterfront will not?
We're not saying that it won't generate children, so we will provide schools for the children that it generates. What I've quite clearly said is that Rouge won't be able to take all of the children within their catchment because of the influx of children from this development. However, across the town area or the town estate of primary schools, we will be able to accommodate all of the children.
Okay. My experience, one last question, sir. My own personal experience is that people who choose to go and relocate to live in town have found that they find themselves unable to secure a place at their primary school in town, and they end up having to bus their children out to Samaray, St Clement's, or further afield. Is that now no longer the case?
I would say that was certainly in my time that I've been with government, that has not been the case ever.
Okay, and how about St Luke's?
St Luke's is a one form of entry primary school. It is oversubscribed in St Luke's, yes, I would
Yes,
agree
it
with
is.
that. But that's about the catchment area for St Luke's.
Right, but then that
there
means...
are schools around about that area that children can go to.
So my questions are really aimed at the whole, you know, the need for school provision, for primary school provision generally, because I personally think it's a problem, have children having to do long journeys away out into countryside locations when they live in town.
We don't have, I'm not going to sit here and guarantee, but I can categorically say that there is space within the town area, town schools, to accommodate all of the children that would wish to go to a town school.
Okay.
We do have children that don't go to a town school who live in town, and that is through choice that they do not go to a town school.
Okay. Right, well, thank you very much, sir. Thank you for allowing me a chance to do what I was never able to do when I was a minister, which is to find out what was actually going on in the education estate.
I did answer a few of your questions.
Well, no, but to do it directly, there's nothing like it. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
I suppose there is one clarification for the planning inquiry. We've heard that these developments are over 12 years. You're giving us the numbers now. How confident we can be that that will be the case over the next 12 years, once we've used up the site and filled it with housing?
So the future sort of birth rates, I've only got them till 26, 27, but birth rates have dropped, so they haven't gone up, even though we had COVID and we thought there might be a baby boom. There wasn't. Actually, numbers of children born was lower. So we don't anticipate that to fundamentally change. We have a board year this year, so, as I say, in year 6, going into year 7 of 1,189 children. That's up on 99 from last year, which was also a board year for the West. So over those 2 board years that we've had, and generally speaking, we have under 1,000 born, to have 1,100 born and over 1,100 born in the last 2 years has been a particular challenge in terms of year 7. However, we've been able to accommodate all of those children. Yes, not necessarily in the Kennebec catchment, because the Kennebec is built for 750 children, and actually with a new school, what we do find is that people try to move into catchment for those new schools.
Okay.
Certainly within the town area, the catchment schools for town schools, sorry, the secondary catchment schools for town schools is Hope Valley, Liverpool and Granville, so depending on where you live and your definition of town. But for this development, it's Hope Valley, and Hope Valley has 7 forms of entry, and if we needed to, we could take the Rock here up to 8 forms of entry. So there is space in the system for that children.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Okay, Ms McCarthy, on schools. And I'll just guide you before you start talking.
Yes, please.
I've heard from the officers that the school estate, existing and planned, has the capacity to accommodate planned pupil numbers at the different levels. At the moment, that's what I'm going to write in my report to the Minister. So your question, if you have one, needs to be focused around that particular issue.
Well, although, to be fair, I applied to, I made a formal application to speak at the inquiry during the sessions, and that was agreed. So it wasn't just restricted to what you're saying now, but
Do you understand the
I did
contributions
understand what
that
you're
you
saying,
make?
which is slightly
They-
different.
You're meant to be helping me.
Yes, I am, and I'm helping you in the context of, as a member of the public, on my personal experience and understanding of how important the school is for future developments. But it's much more than just a school placing. Schools are the heartthrob of a community. They're not just schools, buildings, they are also community centres at the weekends and the holiday period. Also, schools are very dependent on voluntary services for those children with special needs that are dependent on local people in the community, a retired accountant helping a child with mathematics. So it's well beyond the frame. The other thing about schools, and I'm past experience, I was privileged to work with the government on the schools programme, and that led to Whole Valley, which I think is an incredible school. But on that basis, I then advised the government on the whole PFI school programme across the whole of the UK, including schools within urban framework. One of the most important things about the schools, you can't drop them in as an afterthought because of privacy. You can't have blocks of flats overlooking a school playground. Not that there is necessarily going to be a threat, but the children feel threatened because they read the social media. And so what I am saying is that a school, if you're doing thinking of the public interest, that's the test that this is going to be finally decided on, how important a school is and how it would inform the master plan. And one of the drivers will be overlooking the school's playground, and that is also has been considered, and planning applications have been refused in Jersey on the grounds that a block of flats was to overlook a playground. So it's fundamental part of the exercise. At least it's future-proofed that it can accommodate a school if a future island requires it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can come back on that slightly if you want. I think with the development the size that it is, to build a new school on that particular site or near to that site wouldn't yield enough children to even fill a one form of entry school, because you would only really have children from that development going to that school because of our 6-lane highway that cuts in between. So I think I'll answer it almost with a question for the developers in that, yes, we can house all of the children, but it's making sure, and I think it's not really a question that can be answered in this session, but what provisions will be made in terms of ensuring the safety of children crossing that road and getting to school. I think that's more around where we need to be looking at this, not necessarily being able to build a school on the site, but making sure that our children can move from the site safely to the schools in the surrounding area.
Oh, that's interesting, thanks. So that's something we would certainly pick up in the transport session tomorrow morning about connections and highway safety. Okay, that's clear, thank you. Right, we took that particular issue out of order. So you are free to go.
Thank you. I do have one question. It doesn't, again, relate to this session, I'm afraid, but to save me coming back, possibly. It's around, whilst I say that we've got enough space in the system for schools, I definitely think that's the case. What I would like to know is what provisions are being made for children and young people to play within the development, and yeah, so that, again, and I know that's covered in a later date, so it might be that I need to come back to pose that question, but...
Yes, it is the nature of this inquiry with the topics that none of them are sort of neat with the boundaries. There are lots of overlaps. We have a session later on amenity space provision, and then tomorrow we've got session 8, which actually does include items on space for children and play. So it would probably be late morning tomorrow when we got to that.
I will try and come back tomorrow for that.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you for your contribution this morning. Okay, well, if we then go back to the top of the list for session 5, and I'm going to turn to, I guess it's Mr. Nicholson, housing need, mix, density and affordable housing. There's quite a lot there to unpack, so you might want to do it one at a time.
Thank you, sir. I touched on the issue of housing need in our position is set out in the main in the updated planning statements, page 27, in response to the housing chapter of the Bridging Island Plan. I think that it is common ground, having read the statements from the government team, that there is a serious issue in relation to the delivery of housing in the island. My thoughts around that are aligning exactly with the commentary in the island plan. So, just by way of background, this is a bridging island plan. It's for a short 5-year period, running to the end of 2025. In looking at housing needs in the island, the Bridging Island Plan had, as a background document, an objective assessment of housing need, and that established a figure which was broken down into this Island Plan figure, the 5-year target of 4,000 new homes. The Island Plan also recognises, both looking backwards and looking forwards, that continuity of supply is a very important issue. And indeed, that figure of 4,000 new homes is, to quite a large extent, inflated by underperformance in the last plan period, not against what the plan set out, but against the actual level of housing need, with the plan understating it quite considerably. Just in terms of what that 4,000 new homes means, it means that over a 5-year period, per annum, 800 new homes per year are prorated. Under the previous Island Plan, the delivery rates across 2011 to 2021 averaged something like 370 units per annum in that 11-year period. So in changing the supply figures, we are effectively doubling the required level of delivery. Now, we don't have great housing completions data, but there was a submission to the Bridging Island Plan, which set out the delivery rates for the preceding periods. And that included relatively up-to-date figures for 2020, 331 units, 2021, 321 units. They are noticeably lower than the preceding 10-year average, and within the current plan period, they are nowhere near the required 800 units. I expressed surprise during the island plan examination in public that whilst the plan requires a doubling in the rate of housing delivery, it doesn't really do much to facilitate that. The only direct designations are for a provision of approximately 460 new homes of 4,000, just 12%. And they are the rezoned affordable housing sites. And the Bridging Island Plan mandated that they all need to have development briefs before they can come forward. And in my planning statement, I noted that despite the passing of the first anniversary, those development briefs have not been published for consultation. So that happened yesterday. The development briefs were issued yesterday for that 460 unit supply. I think that it is highly unlikely that they will actually be delivered, completed, within this current plan period. I have similar concerns about the balance of apparent supply in relation to deliverability, accepting that this application itself is not going to be yielding homes within the current plan period. But the figures that the government relied on in bringing forward the island plan included sites such as the ambulance station, where there is no application, no permission. It included South Hill offices, where there have been 2 schemes refused. It included Westerway Court, which has been refurbished for staff accommodation. And it includes other parts of the government's estates where large strategic decisions have yet to be made in relation to existing government office stock, the Mott Street offices, and St Saviour's Hospital. There are no applications for any of those sites, and yet they were down to yield homes within the current plan period. Alongside this, we have sites which have, for other government strategic reasons, also been removed from the housing supply stock, such as the Revere and Stafford hotels, where the site has now been incorporated into the potential future hospital project. And we heard from the last witness about the Jersey Gas site, which did have outline permission for housing, but is now under consideration for a new school. These all illustrate the pressures on land within central St Helier. In the context of a spatial strategy which seeks to direct new development to the town centre of St Helier, there is a massive challenge as to how, going forward in this plan period and the next, this island seeks to deliver its housing targets. We have heard in the early sections of the island plan that the delivery of new housing is expected to be a top priority. So I believe that this context is recognised in part through the hierarchy and breadth of policies which already point to this site as a housing development opportunity, leading a mixed-use scheme. We know how the site is referenced in the Bridging Island Plan. We know about the urban character appraisal and the acknowledgement that this site should be a focus and is one of the less sensitive locations. And we know about the adopted housing commentary in the South West St Helier framework. I believe the pressing need for housing is a very significant material consideration as a strategic policy objective of the island plan. And I believe that this application is one of the best opportunities in relation to its likely deliverability that we have identified anywhere in the planning system. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Let me just play back what I think I was hearing from you there in terms of bullet points. Mr Nicholson, so you don't challenge the assessment of need as stated in the BIP. You and that reflects your assessment of 800 dwellings per annum delivery. And then you're saying that whilst the BIP sets that out, it doesn't actually do anything in terms of establishing the sites or the mechanisms to do what would actually be quite a step change in delivery from the numbers that you were quoting.
Yes, sir.
That's the sort of
Yep.
missing bit. So do I read into that your prediction is that we get to the end of the BIP period in 2025 and we've got another shortfall on a previous shortfall?
I think the table H1 in the island plan, when that is interrogated,
Sorry, let me just get to that. That's,
I can point you to page 199.
yes.
One of the biggest problems, and it has been for a very long time, is the lack of transparent information in relation to housing land availability. This is the one point in the last decade, being the review of the policy position leading to the Bridging Island Plan, where that actually came forward in a vaguely clear way. It was not even submitted to the examination public, and it came as a result of questions in the examination itself. I believe there are inherent problems with it, and I believe that when we look at the rezoned sites, they will not come forward. I cannot believe that with the development briefs only being published yesterday, there is any reliance on delivery within this plan period. And when we look through the town capacity, through the sites which are nominally noted here, there is no urban capacity study. Those sites are not identified, other than in the kind of longhand commentary that went with the assessment of housing supply in the Bridging Island Plan. And when you delve into those sites, I would suggest that the majority of the anticipated yield will not be within this plan period. The scale of what the island plan seeks, if we just put it into question, sir, we've got a public inquiry running here for a development of 984 units. The island plan talks about delivery of 800 units per year. And in the context of a development of that scale, how on earth does it propose that that delivery actually occurs?
Okay, well, just make the point, I'm not obviously re-examining the Bridging Island plan, but I understand the point.
The emphasis then sits on proposals such as this, and it is my view that in the absence of any other identified pipeline, that is a significant consideration.
I get where you're coming from. You're saying all of that points to a ratcheting up of the weight for this very large deliverable site.
Correct.
Yeah, understand. Okay, well let's hear from the. I was going to say the planning authority, but I know things are slightly different in Jersey. Ms. Daines.
Yes, so just to point out, so Natasha Day, I'm the head of strategic housing and regeneration, so a team separate from planning. But by way of context, before I became head of housing, I was the programme manager for the development of the island plan and co-lead author for the development of the island plan. So I hope I can cover both matters of the evidence base of the island plan and also the housing need relative to my current role. So just starting with really the question as to whether or not the Bridging Island plan is sound. I'll point out that the plan did go through a rigorous examination process and the plan was found to be sound. And that included an assessment of the land availability that had been identified and set out in the evidence base that underpins the plan. I would, however, agree with Mr Nicholson that the deliverability of that is an issue. I would disagree that the deliverability of that is the responsibility of the plan itself, but actually responsibility of developers, of the conditions of the economy, whether or not the demographic change and population increase happens as it was envisaged to happen when the Bridging Island plan was developed. So in the context of the Bridging Island Plan, you know that it was a shorter period island plan because of the uncertainty that was created as a result of both Brexit and COVID-19. And in my statement of case, I highlight that in itself caused you to question the long-term assessment of housing need, which underpins the plan. So in these really challenging times where it's very difficult to plan for the future, all you can do is make reasonable assumptions. And that is reasonable assumptions on land availability, that's reasonable assumptions that sites will come forward. But ultimately, the longer-term delivery of the plan is still at the mercy of the economic conditions, the planning decisions that follow, and therefore I don't think the land availability issue is key here. I think it is the conditions of today that are key, which, going back to Mr Nicholson's point about the very ambitious target to deliver a doubling of the historic rate of housing delivery, that is what I see as being key, because this is not only an ambitious target, but it was a necessary one. The alternative to say that we wouldn't double the rate of housing delivery would have been to say we would probably have an undersupply. So the delivery of 4,000 homes over the 5-year supply period, again, I would agree, I don't have the data. It would be nice to have real-time data of delivery. But given the pattern of decisions and the speed at which planning permissions are coming forward over the first year of the Bridging Island Plan, I would agree that it's of absolute importance that we secure a pipeline of planning approvals that can help us towards that 4,000 figure. The South West and Helier proposals actually fall outside of the 5-year supply period that was identified, so that the urban capacity sites that informed the 4,000 units did not include the 1,000 units that would be realised on this site. However, that's not to say that this site wouldn't play a really vital role in contributing towards those 4,000 homes in light of the difficult conditions for deliverability that we are experiencing today. So I guess I can only conclude that there is a great deal of uncertainty around the deliverability of housing supply over this period and beyond. There are a number of variable factors that are outside of the government's control and the applicant's control that will influence our position that we find ourselves in when the first phase of this development is realised. But it's so vitally important that we secure that supply and enable it to be delivered as and when it's required into the longer term.
Okay, well, I've got a couple of questions on that. And the first one, based on what I've heard about the Bridging Island Plan, and you make the point it's an interim short-term plan. Was it actually realistic to include within that this doubling of housing delivery? Because I've been around for too many years. It just doesn't happen. The market just does not respond in that way. So I suppose my question is, isn't the plan destined to fail on that point and create that shortfall which will go into the subsequent island plan period?
Of course that's possible, but again I'd reiterate, I don't think that's the fault of the plan. It's really important that the plan tries to meet the needs that are expected to arise over the plan period. It is not the Bridging Island Plan that sets a target for housing. It responds to a need for housing. So that need is calculated on anticipated population change. The amount of housing that was calculated for the Bridging Island Plan was based on an assumption of population growth. So if the plan didn't try to deliver 800 homes, it would do nothing than meet a shortfall, as would potentially the oversupply. So it's a very difficult situation, one that was drawn out a lot in the island plan debate. Ultimately, it falls down to a population growth issue in the island, which is of course subject to our migration controls and population controls that exist. But it is critically important that the plan recognises that longer term pressure and demand for housing and does what it can to enable it to be delivered, but it of course cannot deliver it itself.
Mr Nicholson, do you want to come back?
I understand that position, but I'm afraid it jars with me considerably in relation to the purposes of the island plan in the context of what the law sets out. We need to move policy from an academic position at the high level into an understanding of how the priorities that are set actually get delivered in practice. Now, so this was noted in a report that came out last week from Mr. McKinnon, who has provided a review of planning services for the government of Jersey. And I don't agree with all its contents, but it's an interesting read. One element that came out in his conclusions is that, paragraph 96, there is no clear and succinct statement from the government of Jersey about the role of the planning applications team in shaping the future of the island, other than they should be more responsive. Nowhere is there a single compelling narrative about what the service is seeking to achieve and how this can be achieved through priorities, performance management and reporting. It is not in the interest of the island to have a development plan that doesn't include a process for actually delivering the priorities that it sets. I think, sir, the island plan did make some steps towards a strategy as to how, at the highest levels, the members who debated this envisaged that there would be change. I think we can see that in the urban character appraisal when it talks about the development dilemma, which is what we're here to do. The island plan has a series of policies, some of which could perhaps be described as constraints or tests that applications need to go through. And the urban character appraisal recognises that in the development dilemma. It says, look, we have to understand that the planning process is going to involve change. Part of that change is to meet our housing needs. How are we going to do that? And the commentary is in there. In the island plan, there was a great deal of debate, which John Young was on his feet for the best part of a fortnight, trying to manage through the process. One of those changes, for example, was the amendment to the tall buildings policy, which loosened the position to some degree, but part of that was an acknowledgement that when you have a strategic priority to redevelop the most sustainable sites, that then you need to open the door slightly and provide a framework that says how you're going to expect that to be delivered. I would like to read, I was going to save this for my summing up. You may hear it again later in the week, sir. In the foreword to the island plan, written by Deputy Young, there are two paragraphs which I think are key, and I think they do go some way to explaining how the members wrestled with the challenge and how they expect weight to be applied in bringing forward the pressing housing needs and other development needs. If I might, sir, the third paragraph, this plan, adopted unanimously by the States Assembly, provides for the much-needed development of homes. It provides for them, and in particular, the delivery of more affordable homes, which we'll touch on in a moment, to help meet existing housing demands driven by changes to the makeup of the island's population and the greatly increased levels of immigration, as we've just heard. Following the clear direction of the States Assembly to limit the spread of urban development into the surrounding countryside, it encourages the better use of already developed land and enables the development of denser, more compact forms of developments, which may also include taller buildings in parts of St Helier that are best able to accommodate them. That is a direct link to the urban character appraisal and the work which we talked about yesterday in terms of how this scheme has evolved by reference to its character. So, how do we deliver housing needs to the island? Well, the former minister has told us the expectations as to the emphasis given in the planning balance to the component parts of this island plan.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I can come back quite simply and to say I think we agree that this development proposal will play an important role in the long-term housing supply for the island. I would just make very clear that there are so many variables in what is happening today that it's difficult to argue one way or another whether or not this proposal will be explicitly meeting an undersupply that's realised of now, or an increase in demand that is as a result of population growth 7 to 12 years from now. The bottom line and the most important thing is that this proposal helps us to build that pipeline of supply that gives us that longer term security and helps us to not fall back into historic traps of undersupply because of a lack of planning decisions that will enable the delivery. So I'm, from my position, I'm very strongly in support of the approval of this quantum of housing in this location, and that I trust the subsequent planning applications that come forward will be an opportunity to retest the housing provision, the housing mix, if that may be necessary in light of all of those variables that can happen between now and then. So keeping it simple that this is an outline permission that is securing the principle of that pipeline of supply, I can't see any issue or any argument of whether or not the BIP is adequate or not, because it's just not relevant in my view. It's that supply.
Okay, so I'm hearing that a consensus that need is significant. It actually makes no odds whether delivery is within the BIP period or beyond the BIP period. That need is not going to go away. Is it also fair to say that this would be the single biggest, as a single site, the largest deliverer of new homes in the foreseeable future?
Yes, it will. So a point to highlight in terms of government and its state-owned entities' role in housing delivery, in that in these periods of great uncertainty and challenges in delivery in the private sector, it's our state-owned entities that give us that continuity of supply. So not only does a development company, but also Anzium Homes, which has a programme to deliver 3,000 homes up until 2030. But this is the single largest planning application. And government and government-owned agencies give us that security of delivery into the longer term, because we are more resilient to the economic conditions that other developers will face.
So, setting aside all of the other issues that we've already heard about, or will hear about, transport, landscape, and tall buildings or whatever, what I'm hearing from you, I think, is that in terms of the plan, whether it's the BIP or the island plan that will follow it, this 1,000-odd homes is strategically very significant.
Yes.
I'm sure Mr. Nicholson would agree with that. Okay.
No, I think we're fine. It's clear. I think we're clear. Thank you, sir. Yep.
Okay. There's a few people that want to. We'll start with Mr. Vibert.
Thank you, sir. So I think it's important to actually appreciate the housing situation in Jersey is not as simple as been explained. There are two organisations that provide housing, one that provides affordable or subsidised housing, and the other developing land owned by the people of Jersey to maximise its profits, and both work in quite separate ways for separate reasons. Now, the suggestion's been put to you, sir, that it's very important that this development goes ahead because there is this huge shortage of homes. But the shortage of homes are not the kind of homes in the mass that are going to go on the waterfront. The waterfront has been instructed that they can only provide 15% for affordable homes, which means, let's say there's 1,000, there's going to be 150 homes that are going to be available. Now, that means that if there's 4,000 homes that are required, it's just a small proportion of what's required. And what's happening in St Helier, and this is really the most important point that I would ask you to bear in mind when you're considering it, is that the island plan has been interpreted that the countryside must be sacrosanct and the development should take place for housing within St Helier. And there are a large number of development companies who are buying up hotels that are no longer needed. Thank goodness there is a market for them. And they are developing many homes and many apartments in the town. And the town has at least 7 to 8 projects currently underway. 2 are under appeal. Both actually, well, one of them Jersey Development. And the difficulty that they're having is getting the planning department to understand some of the issues that come up having to build in places where JDC want to build. So what's going to be important on the waterfront, as it's important for St Helier, is that you provide an environment where people can happily live. And that's not going to happen unless you provide decent green areas and green spaces. It's so crucial for St Helier now that's only got 3 big parks. And when you look at the plans for the waterfront, the first question that you ask is, where are the children going to play? Are we going to see signs everywhere along the waterfront that says no balls, no skateboards, almost no children? And I think it's probably the crucial point about this development is, first of all, the development is not for basically for affordable homes or subsidised homes. And secondly, are we sacrificing the opportunity to provide a decent environment for people in which to live by cramming as many buildings as we possibly can into that? And the argument that it's helping the housing supply is only partly accurate. For instance, so if you were to decide that this was too big a project and there were too many, so let's cut it down to 500 as a figure, that would then mean that there would be 75 homes added to the housing stock instead of 150. That's hardly a big dent in the housing situation for Jersey. So I really do think it's important that the other side who are proposing this project make a proper case about the need, because what we've heard so far is not accurate.
Thank you, sir. We'll talk about affordable housing very soon.
So could I respond on some of those points, if that would be helpful?
You can. I'm just looking at the clock. Yes, so please do, Mr. Henry.
Just very briefly, just picking up on some statistics. I've just gone onto the government's website today, and companies have an opportunity to list their vacancies on the government website. And as of today, there are 1,083 job vacancies on the government website from across all industries. There is the 2021 census has shown or illustrates that we've got almost 15,000 islanders that will be transitioning into retirement age by the 2031 census. And there are only 10,500 currently school-age children that will be transitioning into working age. So we've got a shortfall of 4,500 working-age people. We will either need to accept the closure of businesses on the island, or we will need to enable for their accommodation of that inward migration. We've also had a trend since the statistics show since 1971 of reducing household sizes. So we've gone from an average household size of 2.79 in 1971 to 2.27 in 2021. Now, as a number, that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you multiply that differential by the number of homes currently on the island, that equals 8,000 homes being required just as a result of that reduction in household size.
Sorry, I missed those numbers. Could you give them again?
So in 1971, the average household size was 2.79 persons per household,
Yep.
and we're now at 2.27, and that's been a continuing downward trend.
Okay, thank you.
And as a result of that, 8,000 homes have been required just to cater for the reduction in households, the increase in households that's caused. 50% of our households are presently either single or couples. And 44% of our owner-occupied property is under-occupied by 2 or more bedrooms. We contend, sir, that the mix of units that we presently are proposing on this site will meet the needs of islanders. And just picking up on the point around affordability, something that you may not be aware of, sir, is that the government, the Parliament, has obligated Jersey Development Company to only sell these units to owner-occupiers as flying freehold. So that means we can only sell these units to either entitled or licensed islanders under the housing categories for their owner occupation. There is some confusion in the market, sir, around the reference to the word affordable, because what may be affordable to one person will mean something different to somebody else. Effectively, in the Bridging Island Plan, the reference to affordable housing means subsidised housing, and that subsidised housing is predominantly being provided for by Andium Homes, the government's social housing provider. Jersey Development Company is focused on delivering open market, non-subsidised homes. However, the Bridging Island Plan also provides for any developments of more than 50 units to deliver 15% of those units as subsidised properties, and that will come through in the form of a shared equity unit. Jersey Development Company strives to attract first-time buyers and owner-occupiers to our developments, and to date, we have achieved on our open market, non-subsidised homes, 35% of those units have been bought by first-time buyers. We have in place a payment scheme which enables buyers to reserve their units without a deposit, paying that deposit over the build period.
Has that got a name, that scheme?
It's a catchy name of the deposit payment scheme, or we actually don't have a. It effectively, we require on any pre-sales a 10% deposit to be made, but for first-time buyers, we enable them to pay that deposit in stage payments over the build programme.
Okay. Thanks.
So we contend that these properties will be accessible by islanders, otherwise we will have failed and we will have an unviable scheme. We are not going to be putting these units at a price that means that we don't achieve buyers for these units. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure that we cover all of the topics. I think we're straying a little bit into affordability, which I do want to deal with separately. The focus of the discussion we've just had, Mr. Nicholson and Ms. Day, has been around housing need, and I think I'm clear on that. We were just taking questions on it. I think, Mr. Vibert, you made some good points, but they did stray a little beyond the issue of need. Mr. Mason, what did you want to say?
It's kind of a nightmare situation for me here now. We have planners over there, the applicant, the planners over here, we have a planner in the middle, and I'm an architect, okay? It's usually the other way around. I think they're both wrong, okay? This is, I don't think it's square ears. I don't think I'm out of order, but it's just crap, you know? Doesn't come any badly this. We've heard from Chris that the site is contaminated. You'll hear from Andrew Lacane on Friday that it's far worse than we think. My understanding at the moment, they don't even have planning permission to remove the spoil from Horizon. And we have to talk about Horizon. 10 years ago, Martin Clancy from Dandara showed me a beautiful silver book, 6-story building for Horizon. And what have we got? We've got a nuclear power station, Chernobyl. Ted, I only met Ted Vibert in this room, what, 3 months? Election time last June. And Sir Mark Bolliart, I think was on the SOGDC committee, trying to explain to me why a £1.7 million flat on the top of Horizon helps solve Jersey's housing problem. There's nothing of the kind. The way it is at the moment, I'm very careful what I'm going to say. They're going to split the site up. It's basically paradise for a big firm like Dandara, okay? Buy every site to make a profit. That is private profit, and the planning department are into social values. And the phrase I've learned is electricity wasn't made by increasing the size of candles. We cannot continue to go down this particular route. Having personally, maybe done about 60 housing schemes in Jersey, mostly social housing, okay? I live in a site, in a development, 120 units, size of 2 tennis courts opposite Social Security, 120 units. This thing here is 11.5 acres, and they're offering 150 units. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. It's easy to say switch it from what is private housing to social housing, but the same problems exist. It's a toxic site. I told you yesterday about the cafe, 30 metres of concrete foundation to protect the building from toxicity. And Chris very eloquently described that this morning, the risks. The 2 books I've bought, this is Elaine Harwood. Do you know Elaine? Have you heard of Elaine?
No.
Okay, she's the doyen of English Heritage. She hands out the listed buildings. Died a couple of weeks ago. This book took us 17 years to produce, and it's English architecture, 1945 to 1975, Space, Hope and Brutalism. And she helped me, the 2 listed buildings I've got, she helped me with those. She's a member of 30, alongside Marcus Spinney. I'm surprised Marcus isn't here. Have you heard of Marcus Spinney?
Yes, I have. Yes.
Okay, he's the Times architectural correspondent, lives in Jersey, and I don't know if he's going to appear or what his views are. I do hope he does appear.
Okay.
A few years ago, they did an analysis of the dense buildings in density. We do rooms per, habitable rooms per acre is what we use. You use acres per, you use houses per acre. Out of the top 4, 3 of them were mine. And I got up to 400 habitable rooms with Dandara, 400 habitable rooms to the acre in town. The press, the media thought we were kind of filled, but we weren't. The standard, it's remained all my career, is 120 units, 120 habitable rooms the upper. Now, somebody's got to tell me what the density of Horizon is, because it's incredible. It's the densest project I've ever seen. And if it's going to go anywhere, it's in the middle of town, not blocking the view for the whole of town of Fort Regent. My Rotary Club, we meet at Radisson twice a month, and I can't believe as I watch this concrete monster going up. But then when I get in the Radisson, you can actually see Elizabeth Castle. In 1643, Charles II his coronation was on that island. It's so important. We've got Charles III at the moment, but Charles II was given respite in Jersey by George Carteret, and his reward for that were the new lands in America, New Jersey. New Jersey came from Old Jersey. As far as I'm concerned, Elaine Howard said in the mid-80s, I did 6 or 7 buildings in the middle of town, which were comparable, in her words, to fill the gap in English modern housing, modern architecture, and they were compared to Alto. And the theme all my career has been traditional materials in modern forms. So, my career
you're covering a lot of ground here, sir.
Sorry?
You're covering a lot of ground from different
I'm going
sections.
to narrow it down. I'm going to narrow it down. I'm just telling you where I come from. And where I come from is taking Jersey students, Jersey politicians, Jersey planners to London, Oxford, Milton Keynes, Malmo, Hammersby, and Vienna. And the densities there, they're low-rise, high density. And this pile of rubbish over here is high-rise, high density. It's nonsense. If it was a student project, we'd throw it up. But I don't criticize. I offer constructive advice. And there is a way out with AI, ChatGPT, Midjourney, all over the world. Firms like Winnie Ma from Amsterdam, who I know, and Bajak Ingalls are doing incredible kind of work. Jersey's maybe kind of 20 years behind London. London's maybe 20 years behind Vienna. Jersey's kind of about 100 years behind. But if we can tap into the new AI procedure, instead of 5 years doing it, do it in 5 weeks, 5 minutes. It's here.
Understood.
We mustn't ignore it. Paul Martin, who was the CEO for Jersey for one year, never met him, but we do talk, said it's the biggest threat to humanity, really. I'll just finish with, quaff. Do you know what quaff means?
Sorry, what was
Quaff. Quaff.
Go on, explain.
It's a collection of quangos. What we got here is a quango. There's 6 members of JDC. Where are they? Where are they? Where are they? They're in England. They get 20,000 to come to Jersey. This is a kind of nonsense, you know? That's where I said yesterday, my trip to Ireland, wind down the window. What's the quickest way to the airport? Excuse me, you're starting from the wrong place. Okay?
Understand.
Okay.
Understand you do. Thank you.
That's the arrangement. That's my book, by the way.
Right, okay.
It's on sale. Thank you.
Okay, right. I think we're in danger of drifting a little bit from the policy issue of housing need. So if there's a specific question on what we heard here in evidence, please ask it. But I've got quite a lot more to cover. Mr. Young, yeah.
Thank you. I'm grateful, sir, and I know the time constraints, but I think in view of the comments of the applicant, I think I should at least make some comment because I did have the experience of taking this plan through the States for 2 weeks, and there's no question that I agree with a lot of what Mr. Nicholson said there. But I think it's important to look at the context. The situation is that there has never been any doubt in my mind, now and as when I was the former minister, when I was the minister, that we are in a very serious housing situation on the island. the points being made by the applicant, again, by Mr. Henry, are right. You know, the reason why, one of the reasons why we can't recruit people is lack of housing. I think there is, so that's undeniable. And of course, my forward was quoted as being overwhelming evidence as why we need the height of buildings and the density and so on, overriding reasons. But of course, if one were to read the forward, which I similarly wrote for Southwest St Helier, which was, okay, it was written before the Bridging Island Plan and certainly written before the extent of the housing crisis that we've now got. So I think that's important. That was in 2021. I did make the point that there was definitely a need to have a balance in the waterfront area because we don't want to destroy. You know, the homes are essential. There's no question. Residential use is absolutely vital. But we need not to create urban jungles and hostile situations. I think it's finding where that balance is. And I think that certainly, I think, was in the flavour, the intent of the forward to the St Helier framework, which I think is germane to this application. But the broader context is of severe housing need. I think there's also a question of timing. I think some of the arguments, we've heard that there has been a delay. Certainly that issue of delivery of the housing supply is, I think, a matter for the current government. And obviously, clearly, Mr. Nicholson's got major issues with that. That's an argument that I shall keep out of. But the Bridging Island Plan, of course, was for a short period, as has been said by the planning officers, is that it was for an immediate period. And we have now a delay in its production, although we now see the development briefs and so on. So I think overwhelming. So I think that I certainly can't challenge the need for provision of homes, and I won't. But I think that has to be done in a way where we create decent, livable communities for people, which means all the points that we discussed about building heights and mitigation and environment, none of that should be set aside because of the overrun. It's important to maintain that balance. I think one last comment, I'll leave it, that Mr. Nicholson's arguments, I think, about the delays and in the delivery of those sites zoned outside of the town I think, are all arguments in favour of why the 15%, why the homes, as many of the homes in the waterfront area, should be affordable. It actually increases the argument for a higher proportion of affordable homes than we've currently got. And again, I'm reminded of the amendment that I certainly brought, and I argued over it, and I got it through, where there is a facility setting out under policy H5 about affordability, which we'll cover in a minute, sir, which does provide a mechanism of that 15% to be increased. And we're going to talk about that, sir, in a moment. But I think, overwhelmingly, there's no question, is that we do need these homes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. McCarthy. This is specifically on the housing need numbers.
Yes, I don't want the public to, or yourself, misled by the applicant who made a statement in his reference to the character appraisal in support of their application. What it does say in the character appraisal is, don't do this mistake. It states, don't go ahead and think that housing shortage is solved by house stacking. And what we want to say is that what they did go on to say in the character appraisal, within 4-storey homes, generating communities that has infinite flexibility for live, work, etc., you can achieve that with 100 homes per hectare. This is 11-hectare site, so you can provide more than 1,000 homes within 4 stories. However, I would stress the other important thing is when you move into high density, detailed design is critically important, not foam blocks. Because what local communities have done by self-build and communities have come up with, where they've achieved 200 homes per hectare, and for 100% affordable housing, delivered by the chair of the Jersey Architectural Commission, has delivered 200 homes per hectare. So what I do not want the public to be misled, that yes, of course we need homes, and we should be getting on with it, but 1,000 homes on this site can be provided within the similar context of St Helier. 2,000 homes can be generated through detailed design and community-led projects, as they have successfully been delivered in the UK. So I do not want the public to be misled that this developer across the road, who's made it very clear it's all driven by profit, what this project is owned by the islanders, and we need housing. And surely it makes sense to provide 2,000 homes for that can be affordable for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. Right. Briefly, please.
Briefly.
Very briefly.
I have to commend Mr. Nicholson for a superb analysis of the problem. But this scheme is every sign of a gated community, wind tunnel streets, and they haven't, they had the opportunity for options and looking what to do with the road. This gated community in Winterford has got a 6, not a 3-lane, not a 2-lane motorway, it's a 6-lane motorway banging through the middle. And the presentation yesterday, I would be embarrassed with the quality of that. You know, it's just dotted lines, and it looks horrendous now. And the architecture, I admire the landscape architects, but they're not architects. And in the visuals, they've got mansard roofs. Takes us back to the 17th century. Excuse me, we're in the 21st century, and the answers are out there. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm going to move us on to talk about some related issues here. This is a difficult section for me to manage because I think we're going all over the place. The issue around housing need, I've understood. I've understood the applicant's position. I've understood the planning authority policy position. I've also listened to the other views. I did say at one point, I think it was when Mr. Mason first spoke, that notwithstanding all of the other issues that we're dealing with in other sessions, the view of the main parties here is that this is a strategically important site for housing delivery. Now, there's all sorts of arguments about whether what's on the table is the right scheme, and that's why we've got all the other sessions. But I don't want us to keep drifting off into other issues. I'd like to just deal with the next two together of mix and density. And really, again, I don't want to open the door in lots of other discussions, but I'd like to, from the applicant, understand how they arrived at the mix that they used for the EIA assessment, the breakdown of one person, 1 bed, 2 bed and 3 bed units. And then I would like a discussion on density, because we've had a lot of comments about density, and to include in that discussion the draft SPG that we heard about yesterday. So if I turn to Mr. Nicholson first, and if you could explain to me how the mix was arrived at. I understand it's 461 beds, 328 2 beds and 196 3 beds. That's from para 5.28 of the EIA.
The mix of housing types, so I wasn't directly involved in this, but I think it relates to the objective assessment of housing needs. And it's set out as to, those figures you just quoted are broken down in a table which is included in the Statement of Common Ground, which shows the 1 and 2 bed mix across each plot of land. The broad breakdown across the scheme as a whole is 46% 1 beds, 33% 2 beds, and bearing in mind rounding, approximately 20% 3 beds. It is my understanding from the submissions from the planning department that that mix is agreed as being aligning with policy requirements. Certainly that is explicit in the planning policy response during the application consultation phase. For clarity, the applicant has confirmed that on a per phase basis, we are quite content that that mix can be conditioned. The planning authority raised some legitimate questions about how the mix has then, how the mix is embedded in other parts of the EIA calculations, such as the provision of open space, etc. And for the avoidance of any doubt, we are happy to commit to that mix, conditioned as appropriate. There was a discussion about the need for flexibility as time passes on, accepting the 12-year anticipated time frame, and if that mix is varied through changes in government policy, etc., then that would need to be dealt with at subsequent reserve matters phases. But the position of the applicant, which I understand is common ground, is that we are going to fix the residential units as per the coloured tables on a per phase basis.
Okay. So the planning authority,
Yeah, just to confirm, that is the agreed position.
okay. And we'll pick up that conditioned approach in the conditions session. What about density then? Right, let me just set the scene in terms of where I think we are. I've seen a document which I think is, yes, core document 3.22, which is, I think, an email exchange between Mr. Johnson and Mr. Nicholson. Well, I think the document is actually Mr. Nicholson's email of the 30th of March. There is also the draft supplementary planning guidance that we heard about yesterday from Mr. Coates, and he indicated that that SPG would likely be in place by the time a decision is made on this application. Mr. Nicholson, tell me about density.
Okay, so first of all, I was a little bit surprised, but that may not be unique to this instance, about the my email becoming a core document. The matter is also considered in the planning statement, which, in my recollection, sets out broadly the same position. Right. Housing density. This is in the context of policy H2 of the island plan. The purpose of policy H2 accepts the encouragement of the development of new homes in the island's built-up area, and it requires optimum efficiency in the use of land. So the tests in relation to density, in its crudest sense, are to generally increase the test. It sets what might be considered as minimum thresholds to ensure that development meets or exceeds the adopted minimum residential standards for the island's built-up areas. Right, we don't have any adopted minimum residential standards for the island's built-up areas. Mr. Coates suggested yesterday we may have those shortly. So I'm sure you will bear that in mind when coming to your thoughts on this issue. But for the purposes of this policy, there are a series of other tests. So it isn't deferring only to a mathematical approach. The policy itself says an appropriate density for an individual site will be informed by, and it lists 4 bullet points: the quality of the design relative to the nature of the site and its local context, and the character, capacity and sensitivity of the area to accommodate development. We went through a lot of those points in the discussion yesterday. Second bullet point, the quality, type and mix of homes to be created and its contribution towards the creation of sustainable communities. We've just touched on the housing mix. The quality will be discussed in later sessions this week as well. The third bullet point is the level of accessibility by walking, cycling and public transport to a range of services and facilities, including the capacity of local infrastructure to accommodate the development. So we know here that we are right at the top of the hierarchy set by the spatial strategy in relation to the points covered in that third bullet point. The fourth point is the quantity and quality of amenity space and parking, including visitor parking. So we are having a separate discussion on all those matters as well. So the thrust of this policy is to look at a qualitative and a quantitative matrix of considerations. It is unfortunate that the minimum residential density standards are not yet adopted. It will be interesting to see what they say, because I have raised a consistent issue. It's in my email, which you've identified it as a core document. I think that we, on a gross basis, deliver 85 units per hectare. I think that equates to 232 habitable rooms per hectare on a gross basis. But I am unclear, and the density SPG does not assist me with how we provide a net figure for a 3-dimensionally mixed-use scheme. So this is only talking about residential density standards, when a significant element of the proposal is not purely residential. The figures talk about how areas of public realm may be netted off. It talks about how some of the open space in highways space may be netted off as well. But it doesn't explain how a vertical mix might be appraised when one of those floors is not residential. And I am not clear how to provide a net calculation. My colleague Patrick has sought to provide a net figure, and the Planning Authority have also given us a net figure from their calculations. I don't think we are a million miles apart. It is my submission in the planning statement, and taking account of the calculation that the Planning Authority have provided, that we are within the ranges that the SPG advocates.
Right, let me just... yeah, you would... First thinking, you would imagine this would be quite a straightforward matter of how many units and how big is the site, and a bit of arithmetic, and we have a clear figure. But this is planning, and it's not always like that, is it? Let me just firstly go through my notes. Mr. Nicholson, the document that the email, which yeah, I don't know how it became a core document, but it's CD 3.22, your email.
Yep.
You say the site area, gross site area, is 11.55 hectares. In the environmental impact assessment, it says it's 11.8 hectares.
I can't explain that discrepancy sitting here, so...
Could you just have a look at it? It might just be a typo somewhere. And then it's a shame we haven't got Mr. Coates here, because he did give the information yesterday that the SPG would likely be adopted, and I also asked him the question, are there any changes to it? And I got the impression he was saying no, not really, nothing of any significance. When I think you've come across this, Mr. Nicholson, in that SPG, the draft that we've all seen, it does talk about, in the glossary, net site area, and it says net site area is the area of a development site, including the space that might be required within it to provide internal access, private garden space, car parking areas and children's play space associated with the use and enjoyment of the dwellings to be provided, but excluding any elements of infrastructure and services which might serve a wider area, such as public open space that serves a wider area, significant landscape buffers, public roads or other community infrastructure. Now that then, I think, sets out a challenge to which bits do you chop off?
Yep.
And has that exercise been done between you? No.
No, I think the position was, so in terms of this, sorry, first of all, just state that this became a core document in that policy H2 requires the submission of a density statement and schedule of
Yes,
accommodation.
that's right, yes.
So that's why it was highlighted to the applicant. We didn't have an updated planning statement, so there was nothing which spoke to this issue within the application submission. So as is ordinary, when we get information from an applicant, which we take into consideration, we would publish that to our register. That's how it became part of the inquiry core documents. And in fact, we only got the updated planning statement after the deadline for proofs of evidence. So this was the information that we had to go on. We did seek clarification, and well, I went back and noted that the draft SPG provides this clarification on how to calculate net density, but unfortunately, we were not able to. I said that I'd done some crude calculations, which conservatively, it's over 150 dwellings per hectare, but more accurately, it's over 200 dwellings per hectare. And I based that on just taking out flood defence measures, office blocks, the road, La Rue de la Libération, I removed that, the 2 areas of public open space, and I think it was just those elements, so I left in any of the other mixed-use components, the open space within the scheme outside of the protected open space, and that came to over 200 dwellings per hectare, but that was just a crude, and in any event, the threshold is 150 dwellings per hectare to be classed as super density, which then requires closer scrutiny, so it was clearly over 150 dwellings per hectare. And that's not to say that density can't be accommodated on this site, but it's just a useful metric to assess in the context of the emerging supplementary planning guidance, which requires this calculation to be done. Natasha might be able to assist in terms of kind of the evolving SPG, because I think you...
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't assist in terms of the status of the SPG, but I can kind of boil it down to what the main consideration is. So this planning application is an outline application of a scale never seen before in Jersey, and supplementary planning guidance can provide general guidance in relation to the normal characteristics you can expect to see with a planning application, but it cannot reasonably accommodate all extremes of circumstances and the variables that come forward. So I would take it back down to what the island plan says. The island plan has primacy as the material consideration, whilst SPG is also a consideration. And that it is that the appropriate density for this site will be a product of its good design. And that has to take into account all of the other features of the site and how well the site performs, not only architecturally and spatially, but also for the community and the capacity of the area to withstand that level of density. So attaching it to a figure within supplementary planning guidance in such unique circumstances as this, in my view, wouldn't be the most helpful metric, whilst an exercise could be undertaken to quantify the density perhaps more accurately than has been done to date. my own view would be questioning the value of that assessment given the complexity and the nature of the proposal that you're dealing with here.
Right. So, yeah, I hear that, but the Minister has issued draft SPG on this very subject. So I can only assume that the Minister thinks it's important. And whilst we don't want to go down the planning by arithmetic route, I must include in my report some commentary on this issue of density in the light of policy H2 and the SPG. I think it would help me greatly if I set you a little bit of homework, because...
So I think we can probably shortcut that, because I think we are in danger of getting bogged down in arithmetic, which isn't really a defining metric. The standards are still draft. They were issued in draft form in I think it was October last year. Hence, the application didn't have a response in a mathematical sense to the metrics around density. We've done our own calculation in relation to netting off existing areas of public open space, but not the proposed public open space, and we get a figure of just under 150 dwellings per hectare. That appears to be a tipping point, which whatever methodology emerges in relation to a net figure, the tipping point then relates to long-term management. And assuming it is taken forward in the way that the SPG currently envisages, at the top of page 12 of that SPG, the framework of planning for good management is set out. We're quite happy to commit to that, irrespective of the mathematics. If these are not complex things, and they are factors that will all come to bear on the creation of a successful place. It talks about a management plan to specify how the landlord will manage levels of security and address individual tenant antisocial behaviour issues. It talks about how rents and service charges will be dealt with. Not all of those issues are going to be relevant to all the units. There will be a range of points there. It talks about a maintenance plan, and we've already spoken about how the landscaped areas and external spaces will be talked about. And the third point is a residents' forum to discuss management and changes in procedures and obligations. We are quite happy for a condition, planning obligation agreement, to be an exemplar of how this management plan that the SPG envisages is delivered. We don't want any ambiguity on it, sir. If there's a question around it, we will get on and do what the SPG delivers, whether or not we tip that threshold.
Okay. Well, that's one element of the density issue, and that sounds helpful. But I do, as I said earlier, I've got to give some commentary to the Minister on density in the context of policy H2 is SPG, and also it's in the there's quite a good section in the urban character appraisal review, isn't there? Where just get it in front of me now. I mean, it gives some international examples, and I've got to sure there were density calculations for developments in St Helier. I can't find them now, but I can remember seeing Westmount Gardens and the Westmount Flats in there, and it would be useful if you're able to agree a number that you employ a similar methodology to that used in the UCA review 2021. I don't know what that is. see if I can find it now.
I've got page 94, sir.
94. Yeah, I was just coming to that, yes. Yeah, got it.
There's also on page 13 a table for housing densities for a range of development scenarios in St Helier. Optimistic levels, urban development mix.
That's right.
Yes, that's page
Yeah.
13.
Yes, that table you referred to, Mr Nicholson, they're all quite small sites, aren't they? So I doubt any one of those is going to have that challenge of which bits do we keep
net
in.
off.
Mm.
I think even taking the figure of 150 dwellings per hectare that we are probably there or thereabouts on, that is in the kind of lower quarter of those proposals set out there.
If I draw your attention to page 13, the two tables there, one is an optimistic level of density, which is the higher, and one table being the realistic levels of density. And that talks about a low density range in urban development mix of 40 dwellings per hectare up to a high range of 250 dwellings per hectare. And when you were looking in higher density areas, which I would think that this would qualify as a high density area, it would be a 50% benchmark of that 250 dwellings per hectare as an average. So that's really where, again, it's very, very difficult because, within a wider density area, where is your line? The line of this site is somewhat arbitrary because you're looking at a defined planning application area, whereas this is having to generalise in a wider urban area. So there's a range, basically, from low 40 dwellings per hectare to high 250 dwellings per hectare.
Okay. Well, Mr Nicholson and Ms Johnson, can you accept my challenge of a bit more homework on... I would like to be able to report to the Minister that the main parties have agreed that the density is per hectare.
Based on the net density.
I think you need, yes. I think that's where the SPG is leading you.
Be clear.
We've done some calculations which we're happy to share. We may have a kind of range rather than a pinpoint figure.
That's fine. Okay. Right. I don't want to open the discussion on take the maths into other areas, but I do want to talk about affordable housing, which has been touched upon. Right. I'm just thinking about the time. Do you want me to start on affordable housing now? I've just got a feeling it's going to trigger quite a few questions. Do you want to start now, or do you want to take a break?
We can be very brief on affordable housing. There's a requirement in the island plan for a minimum of 15% provision.
And
we will deliver that secured through planning obligation agreement. I don't think there's any dispute with the regulatory team.
Okay. Well, I've got a few questions. The planning authority position is...
one of agreement that they comply with the policy requirements of policy H5 and equally of H6 of the island plan, and also consistent with states decisions that have been taken outside of the plan. There's a requirement in the island plan that the level of affordable housing provision, if it's anything other than 100%, is is agreed in the government plan, which is the government's annual budget, and that was agreed in the 2023 budget to be a minimum of 15% for this site.
Right, now let me ask a few questions on this. Let's go to Bridging Island Plan Policy H5, which is the affordable housing policy. And on the printed version of the plan, on page 206, about halfway down, it says the following. Where States of Jersey or state-owned companies' land is brought forward for development of new homes, these shall be for affordable homes, unless it has been otherwise proved that the development needs to specifically provide open market homes, particularly where this is required to ensure the viability of public realm and community infrastructure delivery in line with an approved government plan. Now, are you saying that that has been triggered?
Yes, I am.
And what is that document?
So the 2023 government plan is the annual budget for the government that was approved in December of last year and serves us for this year. We, as a result of this policy requirement, which was a relatively late insertion into the draft Bridging Island plan, there is now a section within the government's budget that talks about states-owned land that we brought forward by states-owned entities and what the housing mix of that will be. Because, of course, the very existence of the States of Jersey Development Company is to basically create a development profit that is reinvested back into the community through various requirements, be it in infrastructure provision or further regeneration activity or other. And so there's a very entwined relationship between the functioning of Jersey Development Company and the government's annual budget, because we are dependent on the functioning of our state-owned entities and their delivery profile to invest into public infrastructure, hence why it's wholly appropriate that the level of affordable housing provision, which is, of course, subsidised housing, which removes some of that development profit that may otherwise be invested in much-needed infrastructure, that is recognised as part of the government's budget, because you will be taking basically funding from a part of an infrastructure requirement and placing it somewhere else. So that was approved by the States Assembly in the government plan debate of the government plan 2023. And it is expected that that will re-roll into subsequent island plans, and new sites as they come forward will also be included.
So if it's any assistance, I went through the same process in reviewing that policy in the planning statement, and in relation to H5, I've actually cut and pasted the extract from the government plan.
So that's in your planning.
Yeah, it's top of page 29, it ticks over from page 28 to 29.
Top of page 29.
I think it's this updated planning statement.
That box at the top of page 29 is a direct cut and paste from the government plan.
I'm struggling with this. I don't really get it. As I read the plan and the bit I read out there, and I read it alongside policy H6. So let me just go to policy H6, because policy H6 is about making more homes affordable, and I won't read the whole policy out, but the start of that policy H6 is development proposals involving the creation of 50 or more new dwellings will only be supported where at least 15% of the development is made available for sale or occupation by islanders eligible for assisted purchase housing. So this is assisted purchase housing. So that is what would apply to any developer. And then when I read policy H5, it appears to differentiate developments on States of Jersey or state-owned companies' land. and say that these will be for affordable housing. And then it gives the circumstances, or it points to the circumstances where, well, if I read that, if I interpret that, it seems to be telling me that on state-owned land, the default position is 100% affordable housing. Is that correct?
So, yes, I would agree. The default position, as stated in the policy, is that state-owned companies' land will be brought forward for affordable housing. However, there is a very important caveat in this policy in that it can be less than 100% affordable housing, where other really very important community infrastructure elements are being proposed, and that is very key to the functioning of the States of Jersey Development Company, and particularly pertinent to the South West St Helier planning application, in that there is a whole host of other very important community infrastructure investments being proposed as part of the development.
So what is that?
So if I can answer that.
Please.
So the investments that we will be making effectively within the red line, there will be no government funds being invested in the project. So Jersey Development Company, through the crystallisation of land value and development profit on the sale of the completed accommodations, whether that be residential or commercial, will be set aside and invested in the new areas of public realm, the re-landscaping of Route de Libération, the delivery of underground public parking, the delivery of a below-ground cycle hub, the extension to the coastline and the improvements to the enhancing the sea defences, the new sport and leisure complex that will replace the Aquasplash. All of these facilities and amenities, public infrastructure, will be provided by the development at a total cost of £150 million. If the site, and we can also provide for the 15% shared equity provision, that is also included within that envelope.
But there's no appraisal in front of me to evidence that 15% couldn't be 20% or 25% or 30%, is there?
If I may come back on that point, this has been the subject of much debate, certainly politically, over the last 3 years, I would say, in Jersey, starting with some propositions that have been brought to the State Assembly by backbench politicians, a report presented by the former Council of Ministers that made the first commitment to deliver a minimum of 15% of affordable homes, and then onwards into that then becoming baked into the Bridging Island plan. The 15% of the overall development in terms of a quantum of housing is quite irrelevant in my view as a standalone figure, because it has to be coupled with the amount at which those homes would be subsidised. So I've had many discussions with the applicant about this, and that it could be 15% of the overall development at 30% shared equity, or you could reverse those figures and have 30% of the development at a 15% shared equity. The policy that has been agreed out with the island plan, so that is the agreed position of the Council of Ministers and also the government plan, allows that flexibility to move the figure from 15%, because it is a minimum, 15% to say 30%, whilst dropping the shared equity element and remaining viable within the overall financial envelope. From a housing policy standpoint, that flexibility, given that we are talking about a longer-term provision of housing, is very important, because we cannot reasonably predict today what the prevailing economic conditions will be at the time, and what the prevailing affordability challenges will be at the time when these units come forward. What we can say, much like what we said with establishing the principle of housing need, that notwithstanding the degree of uncertainty for our longer term position, we can be quite confident that there will remain an element of need, and that our housing affordability challenges on the island will not quickly resolve themselves. But given that the States of Jersey Development Company are a states-owned entity, given that the government plan, which is approved by the entire States Assembly, has to reevaluate the 15% and the overall level of affordable housing in its value terms, has to be approved. That from a housing policy standpoint, I'm very comfortable that the minimum position that the applicant has stated in their proposal is both compliant with the island plan and allows that longer term flexibility for that to be increased or reprofiled as the prevailing conditions, affordability conditions of the day arise over the next up to 12-year period.
So the commentary in that paragraph for page 206, the middle paragraph, I think there is some important continuing commentary that we do need to touch on. Where States of Jersey or states-owned companies' land is brought forward for the development of new homes, these shall be for affordable homes, unless it has been otherwise approved that the development needs to specifically provide specifically open market homes, particularly where this is required to ensure the viability of the public realm and community infrastructure delivery in line with an approved government plan. In such cases, a minimum of 15% should be made available to eligible persons in accordance with policy H6, etc. We have got unless clearly in there. It opens up questions of the other public gains that the project delivers, and it doesn't ask for viability to be proven through the planning process. It asks that that public realm and community infrastructure delivery is in line with an approved government plan, which is exactly the case here, sir, and that is the extract in the planning statement. If we might continue, this is slightly flippant, but nonetheless, if we're delving into it in this detail, it says 15% should be made available to eligible persons in accordance with policy H6. Policy H6 does not yet apply, because this policy will be in effect from January 2023, following the development and publication of appropriate assisted purchase products and eligibility criteria as relevant to the application of this policy. Those criteria have never been published, sir. So policy H6 does not bite. The question, the question can be clarified by deferring to the position in the approved government plan, which says 15% minimum assisted purchase.
Ms. Day, tell me about policy H6. Is it effective at the moment?
That is a interesting question. So I think it is in effect from January 2023, so I would say it is in effect. However, we have a issue where the supplementary planning guidance that was due to accompany that has not yet been published. That guidance is under development. I am involved with the progression of that guidance, and I did make a remark in my case that I see the proposal as stands as being consistent with what we would expect to see in terms of the delivery of that policy. So again, from a policy standpoint, I don't have any concerns that what is being proposed here would create any tensions with the delivery of H6. And in fact, when those policies were paired, it was with the understanding of what we'd been through in developing the policies for the Waterfront and South Hill development, which established that 15% and how that would be delivered in reality. So actually, it is the functioning of this this arrangement with Jersey Development Company that has driven that policy and the shape of that policy to apply to the private sector.
Okay.
If I may come back on a point about housing need that relates to the provision of affordable homes here. In terms of the progression of the development of the island plan, this wasn't a policy requirement in the draft island plan. It wasn't tested in the examination. It was a change that came about after the examination took place, when States members have the opportunity to amend the plan as part of their own approval process.
I watched the process with great fascination.
And so the amount of affordable housing provision that was being provided for in the plan prior to this policy insertion was found to be sound. So without the state-owned company's requirement to provide affordable housing, the level of provision through the allocation of sites and also the quantum of development, which had been identified in the table that is table H1, was sufficient to meet the island's affordable housing requirement, and in that means subsidised housing requirement. So, of course, we do have an affordability issue on the island, and I would not like to say that that means we should be providing unaffordable homes for the remaining part of the supply. It simply means, and certainly reflects the objective assessment of housing need that recognises you need to provide a mix of homes to suit all different needs of islanders, and that includes open market homes and subsidised housing and subsidised purchase housing and also social housing. So it's vitally important that a mix of housing types and tenures is provided on the island, and there is actually a risk on this site that if the level of affordable housing provision, as in subsidised housing provision, would be too high, that would actually disrupt the housing market overall, to the detriment of the open market, where there would be created a supply and demand imbalance.
Sorry, how does that happen?
So eligibility for subsidised housing is restricted based on affordability.
Yep.
At the moment, the affordable housing purchase policy is set at a level where there's some tension of the market rates, and actually bridging that gap to make the homes affordable. The Minister for Housing and Communities is due to publish an update to that policy soon that is going to significantly widen the eligibility of persons based on their income to allow more people to benefit from subsidised housing in Jersey. What that means in terms of the island's income distribution is that person eligible for affordable housing is already reaching the upper quintiles of our income distribution. So if you put it on a scale and cut into 5, the lowest income islanders to the highest, the eligibility for affordable housing is about to breach up into the highest realms of income. So you can't stretch that policy out any further until you're talking about people who are earning in excess of £150,000 a year being eligible for a subsidy for housing, which in a functioning housing market should not be necessary. When we talk about the availability of housing, when you think about the distribution of housing mix, the open market supply is vital for people who want to live in the open market. Not everybody wants a subsidised home. People want to own their home in outright. If you were talking about even, say, 50% of this development being restricted to persons who were only earning a certain income, you would be denying the supply from the open market, which also very desperately needs homes. So the balance of housing mix and the distribution of subsidised housing on this site is actually very important for the island's longer-term well-being of its housing market, and that we don't want to distort the housing market by inserting too much government subsidy into homes when open market homes are equally required.
And sorry, so if I could just add on that, I think it is on table H1 that sets out of the 4,000 homes required, 2,700 are identified as being open market homes, so non-subsidised homes, and 1,400 as being affordable subsidised homes. And of that 1,400, I would suggest that the vast majority of those, other than the rezoned sites that, as you heard earlier, may or may not be delivered within this plan period, Andium Homes will be delivering virtually all of those affordable homes through their on several sites across the existing built areas of the island. So we are, I would suggest, on target for the affordable. What we're not on target for, other than the potential around question mark on the rezoned sites, but what we're potentially not on target for will be the open market. And constraining the open market will risks continuing to drive prices upward.
Okay. I think we need to break there. It's approaching 1:45, but this subject I think we need to sort of pick up after the break. There's a few more related issues around employment generation and health provision, which I don't think will take a huge amount of time. And then we'll move on to session 6. So could I just take some soundings on return time? It's just coming up to 1:15 now. Happy to restart at 2?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fine, sir.
Just for good order, obviously, I would like the opportunity to speak on this last subject.
Yes, I'm just going to carry on. Yeah.
I didn't want to mix it up with your other subjects. So in terms of clearing out this issue about this amendment to page 5,
Yeah.
which I think is really pretty crucial on the, and I think there are issues that I would personally challenge as a result of that exchange. So,
Yes. We'll just press the pause button now and we'll restart at 2 o'clock. Yeah. Yeah.